What happens when the most powerful alpha in the realm publicly destroys his fated mate? He thinks he's ended her, but rejection doesn't always break you. Sometimes it remakes you. Tonight, we're diving into the story of Nyelle Vireth, the servant girl who got her soul ripped apart in front of 1,000 witnesses, vanished into the wastelands to die, and came back as something the Alpha King never saw coming, a force that would shake Bloodspire to its foundations. So buckle up, this one gets dark. And hey, drop a comment with your city so I know who's watching. Let's get into it. The Great Hall of Bloodspire stank of sweat, wine, and dominance. Nyelle had scrubbed these marble floors 100 times, always on her knees, always invisible. The stone was cold even in summer, unforgiving against her palms when she worked the brush back and forth, until her shoulders screamed and her fingers went numb. Tonight was no different, or so she'd thought. She moved along the edges of the celebration like a shadow, refilling goblets, clearing plates, keeping her eyes down the way Omega-born servants were taught from birth. Don't look. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't exist unless someone needs something. The rules were simple. Breaking them was dangerous. Nyelle had learned that lesson early. She'd been 6 years old the first time another servant slapped her across the face for making eye contact with a beta warrior. "You think you're people?" the woman had hissed, her breath hot and sour. "You're Omega trash. Act like it." 15 years later, Nyelle still kept her eyes down. The Alpha Court was in full swing tonight. Warriors from every corner of the kingdom had gathered for the lunar rite, a ceremony that happened once every decade when the moon burned brightest and the ancient bonds had the best chance of snapping into place. Fated mates, the sacred pull, all that poetic bullshit the nobles loved to go on about while people like Nyelle cleaned up their messes and pretended not to exist. She was good at pretending. She had to be. Because if anyone ever really looked at her, at the Omega girl with the trembling hands and the too thin wrists and the bruises she hid under long sleeves, they'd see exactly what she was. Nothing. A body that served a function. Replaceable. Disposable. More wine, Omega. The voice came from her left. Sharp. Dismissive. A beta warrior with a scarred face and breath that reeked of alcohol, already drunk, shoving his empty cup toward her without even glancing her way. His companions laughed at something, their voices too loud, too aggressive. One of them had his hand on a serving girl's waist, fingers digging in hard enough that the girl's smile looked more like a grimace. Nyelle took the cup without a word, filled it from the heavy pitcher she carried, and moved on. Her shoulders ached. Her feet throbbed in the thin leather shoes that were 2 sizes too small, hand-me-downs from another servant who'd died last winter. She'd been working since dawn, preparing for tonight's ceremony, and she probably had another 6 hours before she'd be allowed to collapse in the servants' quarters. But that was fine. She was used to it. Pain was just part of the job, part of being Omega-born. You learn to swallow it down, keep moving, keep your head low and your mouth shut. Complaining got you beaten. Fighting back got you killed. "Did you hear?" one of the serving girls whispered as they passed each other near the kitchens. Mara, a beta girl with kind eyes, who sometimes snuck Nyelle extra bread. "They say the king himself might find his mate tonight." Nyelle didn't respond. She didn't care. Alpha King Darius Vornhale could find 100 mates, and it wouldn't change the fact that she still had tables to clear and floors to scrub and a life that stretched ahead of her like a long gray tunnel with no end. She slipped back into the Great Hall just as the ceremony began. The room fell silent. It was eerie, the way 1,000 people could go from roaring chaos to dead quiet in the span of a heartbeat. Every head turned toward the raised platform at the far end of the hall, where the king stood. Darius Vornhale. Even from a distance, he was overwhelming. Tall, broad-shouldered, with cold gray eyes that seemed to cut through bone. His presence filled the space like a storm rolling in, suffocating and absolute. He wore black leather and steel, his dark hair tied back, a scar running down the left side of his jaw from some battle Nyelle had heard about but never bothered to remember. He was power incarnate, and he knew it. The way he stood there, looking out over his court with that expression of barely contained authority, like a predator surveying prey, made something in Nyelle's chest tighten. Not attraction, fear. The kind of primal, instinctive terror that came from recognizing something at the top of the food chain. "Tonight," Darius said, his voice low and steady, carrying effortlessly across the hall without him having to raise it even a fraction. We honor the old ways. The moon is full. The bonds are awake. If fate has chosen to bind any of you to another, let it be known. His voice was like gravel and smoke, rough-edged but controlled. The kind of voice that expected obedience and got it. A ripple of anticipation moved through the crowd. Nyelle watched from the shadows near the western wall, the empty pitcher still in her hands, her back pressed against cold stone. She'd seen this before, 3 lunar rites ago when she'd been 18 and new to the palace staff. The ceremony was always the same. Some beta couple would feel the pull, stumble toward each other wide-eyed and breathless like it was the most profound thing that had ever happened. And everyone would cheer like it was some kind of miracle. Then the drinking would resume and Nyelle would go back to being furniture. She turned to leave, already thinking about the mountain of dishes waiting in the kitchen. And then it hit her. A pull. Not gentle, not romantic, not like the stories the other servants giggled about late at night when they thought she was asleep. Violent. It slammed into her chest like a fist wrapped in barbed wire, stealing the air from her lungs. Her vision blurred. The pitcher slipped from her hands and shattered on the marble floor, the sound impossibly loud in the sudden silence. Shards of ceramic scattered across the stone, wine pooling like blood. No, this wasn't... It couldn't be. The pull yanked harder, dragging her forward. Her legs moved without permission, carrying her out of the shadows and into the light. Every eye in the hall turned toward her, 1,000 people watching as the pathetic Omega girl stumbled into the center of the room, gasping, trembling, her heart slamming against her ribs like it was trying to break free and run. What the hell? Is that an Omega? The whispers started immediately, cutting through the silence like knives. Nyelle tried to stop moving, tried to force her legs to obey, but the pull was too strong. It wrapped around her spine, her ribs, her soul, and dragged her forward step by agonizing step. And then her gaze locked onto his. Darius. The king's expression shifted from mild curiosity to something darker. His jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed, those cold gray irises focusing on her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. He felt it too. The bond snapped into place between them like a chain wrapping around both their throats. Ancient, absolute, undeniable. The force of it nearly drove Nyelle to her knees. Her wolf, small, weak, barely there after years of suppression and starvation, whimpered and surged forward all at once, desperate to reach him. Mate. The word echoed in Nyelle's head, louder than her own thoughts, louder than the blood rushing in her ears. It wasn't her voice. It was something older, something primal that existed in the space between human and beast. Mate. Ours. Go to him. She took a step. No. The single word from Darius stopped her cold. It wasn't a request. It wasn't even a command in the normal sense. It was pure alpha dominance, laced with power so thick it pressed down on her like a physical weight. Nyelle's knees buckled. She caught herself, barely, her hands flat against the cold marble. Her palms stung where she'd landed on broken ceramic. The hall was dead silent now, 1,000 people holding their breath. Stand up, Darius said. Nyelle pushed herself upright, shaking so hard she thought her bones might crack. Blood dripped from her palm where a shard had cut her. She couldn't look at him, couldn't breathe. The bond was screaming, pulling, burning inside her chest like someone had shoved a hot coal between her ribs. But his voice held her in place like iron chains. Look at me. She lifted her eyes. Big mistake. The moment their gazes met, the bond flared white-hot, searing through her. Her wolf clawed at the edges of her mind, howling, desperate, throwing itself against the bars of her consciousness. Mate. Ours. Touch him. Go to him. Now! But Darius didn't move. He stood there on the platform, 10 feet above her, looking down with an expression that could have been carved from stone. No warmth, no recognition, no hint of the bond that was currently tearing her apart from the inside. Just cold, brutal assessment, like she was a problem to be solved, or eliminated. What's your name? He asked. Nyelle. Her voice came out barely a whisper, cracked and pathetic. She hated how small she sounded, hated the way her hands shook. Nyelle Vireth. Omega-born? She nodded, unable to force words past the tightness in her throat. A muscle in his jaw twitched. the only sign that he was affected at all. What house?
None, my king,
Her throat closed up. She had to force the words out like pulling shards of glass from her mouth. I'm a servant. The murmur that ran through the crowd was like a wave crashing against rocks, sharp, violent, destructive. Nyelle felt the weight of 1,000 stares pressing down on her. Judgment, disgust, pity. The worst kind of pity, the kind that said, you poor, pathetic thing, thinking you could be anything more than what you are. Someone laughed, a sharp, ugly sound that cut through the murmurs like a blade. More laughter followed. Darius stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. The bond pulsed between them, insistent, demanding acknowledgement. Nyelle could feel his wolf on the other end, massive, ancient, powerful beyond comprehension. It circled hers like a predator, deciding whether something was worth killing or just ignoring. Then Darius spoke, and his voice was like steel dragging across stone. No, that single word shattered the world. I reject this bond. The hall erupted. Gasps, shouts. Someone screamed. Nyelle wasn't sure if it was her or someone else. The sound seemed to come from very far away, muffled like she was underwater. Her mind struggled to process what he'd just said, the words not quite making sense. Reject? You couldn't. Bonds didn't. They were sacred. The bond is sacred, someone shouted from the crowd, his voice cracking with shock. One of the elder alphas, a gray-haired man with a scarred face who Nyelle had seen around the palace. You cannot simply. It is forbidden. The moon has chosen.
I am king, Darius cut him off, his voice rising, filling the hall with the kind of authority that made grown warriors drop to their knees and bare their throats. The dominance rolling off him was suffocating, absolute. I do not answer to the moon or fate, or any power but my own will. This bond is flawed. I will not be shackled to weakness. He looked directly at Nyelle, and the disgust in his eyes was like acid. I, Darius Vornhale, Alpha King of Bloodspire, sever this bond. You are nothing to me. You will always be nothing. I reject you, Omega, completely, eternally, without reservation or regret. Each word was a hammer blow, and then the bond broke. Not broke. Ripped. The rejection hit like a blade through the heart. No, worse than that. It was like someone had reached into her chest, grabbed her soul with both hands, and torn it in half. Nyelle's scream ripped out of her before she could stop it, raw, broken, animalistic. A sound she didn't know she was capable of making. The bond didn't just break, it shredded. Every piece of connection between them, every thread of potential, every whisper of what could have been, tore apart. And as it ripped, it took pieces of her with it, chunks of her soul, fragments of her consciousness, parts of herself she didn't even know existed until they were gone. The pain was unlike anything she'd ever felt. It burned. It froze. It reached into the deepest parts of her and set everything on fire while simultaneously drowning her in ice water. She collapsed. The marble was cold against her cheek. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Her chest felt like it had caved in, ribs crushing her lungs, heart struggling to beat around the gaping wound where the bond had been. The world tilted and spun, her vision going black at the edges, sounds fading in and out. Somewhere above her, Darius was still talking. His voice was steady, calm, like he hadn't just destroyed someone. Let this serve as a reminder, he said, addressing the court now, not her. She was already forgotten, already erased. Power recognizes power. Strength deserves strength. I will not apologize for refusing to debase myself or this throne by accepting a bond with something so far beneath me. The moon may choose, but I have the final say. And I say no. Silence. Then applause. Not everyone. But enough. Enough that Nyelle could hear it through the roaring in her ears, the sound of hands clapping in approval of her destruction. Remove her from my sight, Darius said, dismissive, already moving on. And someone clean up this mess. Hands grabbed her. Rough, impersonal. Nyelle barely registered being lifted, her body limp and unresponsive. Two guards, their faces blurred, dragged her toward the side doors. The voices around her blurred together into a single, mocking hum. Pathetic. Did you see her face? Weak little thing. Did she really think an Omega? Disgusting. Probably planned it somehow.
Yeah, tried to trap him. Good thing the king saw through it. Could you imagine? An Omega queen? Laughter. More laughter. It followed her all the way out of the hall, echoing in her skull like a curse. The doors slammed shut behind her, cutting off the noise with brutal finality. Nyelle was dumped onto the cold stone floor of a side corridor, alone except for the two guards who'd carried her. One of them, a beta with a crooked nose, looked down at her with something between disgust and boredom. "Stay here until you can walk," he muttered, already turning away. "Then get back to the kitchens. Or better yet, get the hell out of the palace entirely. You're done here." "Wait." The other guard, younger, hesitated. "Shouldn't we take her to the healers? Rejected bonds can what? Kill her?" The first guard laughed, harsh and ugly. "Good, one less mouth to feed. Come on." They left. Nyelle lay there on the cold stone, alone, shaking so violently her teeth rattled. The pain from the severed bond radiated through every nerve, every cell, every atom of her being. It felt like dying. Slow, brutal, inevitable. Her wolf was silent. Not dead, but broken. Shattered into pieces so small she didn't know if they'd ever fit back together. She could feel it in the back of her mind, whimpering, bleeding, curled up in a ball of agony. Why? The question echoed in the emptiness where the bond had been. Why us? What did we do wrong? Why weren't we enough? But there was no answer, just pain and silence, and the crushing weight of knowing that she'd been found wanting by the universe itself. Nyelle didn't know how long she stayed there. Minutes, hours. Time stopped meaning anything when you were drowning in your own broken soul. Eventually, the pain dulled from excruciating to merely unbearable. Her body started responding to commands again, sluggish, reluctant, but functional. She forced herself to move, crawling at first because standing was impossible. Her hands left bloody smears on the stone where her cut palm dragged, then kneeling, then finally standing, using the wall for support, her legs shaking like a newborn foal's. Every step felt like walking on broken glass. The bond's remnants still pulsed inside her chest. Phantom pain, a wound that would never fully heal. She'd heard stories about rejected bonds, how the pain never fully went away, how some people went mad from it, their wolves turning feral, their minds fracturing under the weight of what had been torn away, how others just faded, stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped existing until their bodies finally gave up. Was that her future? Madness or death? Both seemed preferable to this. She stumbled through the empty corridors, away from the great hall, away from the celebration that had resumed as if nothing had happened, as if she didn't matter. The sounds of music and laughter drifted through the stone walls, mocking her. They were celebrating. Of course they were. The king had rejected an Omega, upheld the natural order, proven that power belonged to the powerful, and weakness belonged in the dirt where it could be stepped on. Why wouldn't they celebrate? The servants' quarters were dark and quiet when Nyelle finally reached them. Most of the staff were still working the lunar rite, would be for hours yet. She collapsed onto her cot, a thin, lumpy thing in the corner of a room she shared with 4 other Omega girls, and stared at the ceiling. Her chest felt hollow, empty, wrong, like someone had scooped out her insides and left nothing but a shell. She closed her eyes, tried to sleep, failed. The pain wouldn't let her. It pulsed and throbbed and screamed in the space where the bond had been, demanding attention, refusing to be ignored. Around midnight, the other servants started filtering back. Nyelle heard them before she saw them, whispers and giggles and the shuffle of feet. They came into the room in 2s and 3s, still buzzing with excitement from the ceremony. Then they saw her. The whispers stopped, started again, quieter. "Is that... Oh gods, I heard what happened. Can you believe she thought, bae?" So embarrassing. I'd die if that happened to me. She basically did die. Look at her. Nyelle kept her eyes closed, pretending to sleep. It was easier than facing them, easier than seeing the mixture of pity and schadenfreude on their faces. One of them, Lisa, a blonde girl who'd never been particularly kind, laughed softly. Honestly, what did she expect? The king? Her? Shh. She'll hear you. So what? It's true. Girl needs to know her place. I think she knows it now. More laughter, quickly stifled. They settled into their own cots, still whispering, the conversation eventually moving on to other topics. But Nyelle could feel their stares, could sense their judgment pressing down on her like a physical weight. She waited until their breathing evened out into sleep. Then she opened her eyes and stared at the darkness. And for the first time in her life, Nyelle Vireth wished she were dead. 3 days passed in a haze. Nyelle worked because working was all she knew how to do. Scrubbed floors, hauled water, emptied chamber pots, avoided eye contact. The other servants whispered when they thought she couldn't hear, their voices dripping with mockery and secondhand embarrassment. Can you imagine thinking the king would want her? She must have been delusional. Probably put on some kind of act trying to trap him. Thank the moon he saw through it. Yeah, could you imagine an Omega on the throne? Disgusting. Nyelle said nothing, did nothing. She moved through the palace like a ghost, the bond's pain a constant ache in her chest that never eased, never faded, never gave her a moment's peace. She stopped eating. Not intentionally at first, she just couldn't keep anything down. Her stomach rejected food, her body too focused on trying to survive the agony of the severed bond to bother with things like sustenance. She lost weight she couldn't afford to lose. Stopped sleeping. Every time she closed her eyes, she was back in the great hall, standing in front of 1,000 people, while the king looked at her with disgust and declared her nothing. You are nothing to me. You will always be nothing. The words played on repeat in her head, a loop she couldn't escape. On the 4th night, something shifted. Nyelle was in the kitchens, alone, scrubbing a pot that didn't need scrubbing just to have something to do with her hands. The bond's pain had reached a crescendo today, so intense she'd vomited twice and nearly passed out 3 times. Her hands shook as she worked, the brush slipping in her grip, and she realized with sudden clarity she couldn't do this, couldn't stay here, couldn't spend the rest of her life in this palace, in this kingdom, surrounded by people who'd watched her destruction and laughed. Every corner of Bloodspire was soaked in the memory of her humiliation. Every face she passed reminded her of the moment she'd stood in front of 1,000 people and been declared nothing. She would go mad if she stayed, or die. Probably both. So she'd leave. Not dramatically, not with some grand farewell or angry confrontation. She'd just go. Disappear into the wilderness and let the bond's pain finish what Darius had started. It would be easier that way, cleaner. No one would miss her. No one would care. The palace would replace her with another Omega servant and forget she'd ever existed. Maybe that was for the best. Nyelle waited until the palace was asleep, then slipped out through the servants' entrance. She moved through the darkened corridors like smoke, avoiding the night guards out of long habit. The heavy oak door that led to the outside was unlocked. It always was. Because who would bother stealing from the servants' quarters? The night air hit her like a slap, cold, sharp, carrying the scent of pine and stone and something wilder, freedom or death, probably both. Nyelle walked. She didn't run, didn't hurry, just put one foot in front of the other and moved away from Bloodspire's towering walls, away from the city that sprawled around the palace like a tumor, away from everything she'd ever known. She took nothing with her, no supplies, no coin, no food or water or weapons, just the clothes on her back and the broken bond burning in her chest. The wilderness beyond Bloodspire's borders was harsh and unforgiving. Dense forests gave way to rocky hills, which eventually bled into the ashlands. The abandoned territories where nothing grew and no one lived. Lands that had been scorched during the ancient purges, when the first alphas rose to power and wiped out anything that threatened their rule. Nyelle had heard stories about the ashlands growing up, whispered tales meant to scare children into obedience. They said the land itself was cursed, that anyone who ventured too deep never came back, that things lived out there, old things, angry things, remnants of the powers that had been destroyed. She didn't care. Let the cursed land take her. Let the angry things tear her apart. At least it would be faster than the slow death the bond was inflicting. She walked for days, or maybe it was hours. Time became meaningless. She drank from streams when she found them, the water ice-cold and sharp-tasting. Ate nothing. Her body was too focused on dying to bother with hunger. The bond's pain grew worse with distance, like a poison spreading through her veins. Her body started to shut down. Fever, chills, shaking so violent she could barely stand. Her wolf was silent, not dead, but close.
barely breathing in the back of her mind. On the 7th night, or maybe it was the 10th, she'd lost count, Nyelle collapsed in the middle of a barren field. Her legs just stopped working. One moment she was walking, the next she was on her knees, then on her side, her cheek pressed against cracked earth that hadn't seen rain in decades. The sky above her was black and starless, storm clouds rolling in like an invading army. This was it. This was how she'd die. Alone. Forgotten. Exactly the way she'd always been.
The sky split open with lightning, thunder following so close it shook the ground beneath her. Rain poured down in sheets, cold and violent, soaking through her clothes in seconds. Nyelle lay there, staring up at the storm, waiting for the end. Her vision started to fade, black creeping in from the edges. Her heartbeat slowed. Good, she thought distantly. Let it end. Please, just let it end. And then, heat. Not from the fever, from inside her. It started in her chest, right where the bond had shattered. A pulse. A flicker. Like a dying ember suddenly catching flame. Nyelle gasped, her back arching off the ground. What the hell? The heat spread through her veins, her bones, her blood. It didn't hurt. Didn't burn the way fever burned. It felt like waking up after a lifetime of sleep. Her vision blurred, the world around her dissolving into light and shadow, and something else. Something she couldn't name. Memories flooded her mind, but they weren't hers. Voices she didn't recognize speaking languages she'd never heard. Faces she'd never seen, beautiful and terrible, with eyes that glowed like molten silver. Power. Old power. Ancient power. Power that felt like it had been buried so deep, hidden so completely, that even she hadn't known it existed. Until now. The heat built to a crescendo, pressure mounting in her chest like a scream trying to escape. And then, it erupted. Silver-black flames exploded out of her, pouring from her skin like she'd been holding them back her entire life. Nyelle screamed, not in pain, but in release, as the fire consumed her, wrapping around her body in a cocoon of heat and light and raw, untamed energy. The flames didn't burn, they reshaped. She could feel it happening, her body changing, cells rearranging, something fundamental shifting at the core of her being. The bond's pain vanished, incinerated in the fire. The weakness vanished. The fear, the shame, the crushing weight of 21 years spent being told she was nothing. All of it burned away. The flames died slowly, reluctantly, leaving her gasping on the scorched earth. For a moment, Nyelle just lay there, breathing hard, her body trembling with something that wasn't pain or fear. Power. Real power. The kind that hummed in her bones and sang in her blood. She pushed herself up slowly, hands flat against the ground. The earth beneath her palms was warm, almost hot, radiating heat. She looked down and her hands were glowing. Faint silver light emanated from her skin, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. As she watched, the glow faded, sinking back beneath the surface. But she could still feel it, could feel the power coiled inside her like a sleeping dragon. Waiting. Nyelle stood on shaking legs. The world looked different, sharper, clearer. Colors were more vibrant, sounds more distinct. She could hear things she'd never heard before. The whisper of wind through dead grass miles away, the skitter of something small moving underground, the distant crack of lightning. And inside her mind, where her wolf had been broken and bleeding, something stirred. Not her wolf. Something else. Something older. A presence that felt vast and ancient and terrifyingly familiar, like remembering a dream from childhood. And with that presence came a single word, whispered in a voice that was hers and wasn't. Umbra. Nyelle stood alone in the ashlands, rain still pouring down around her, steam rising from her skin where the water hit. The girl who had crawled into the wastelands to die was gone. What stood in her place was something else entirely, something that had been sleeping, waiting, and now it was awake. The rain had stopped. Nyelle stood in the center of a scorched circle, steam rising from the blackened earth where her power had erupted. The ground beneath her feet was warm, almost hot, radiating heat that had nothing to do with the storm. Her clothes were soaked through, clinging to her skin, but she didn't feel cold. She felt alive. More alive than she'd ever been. The silver glow beneath her skin had faded to a faint pulse, visible only when she looked directly at her hands in the darkness. But the power was still there, coiled tight in her chest, humming in her bones, singing in her blood like a song she'd forgotten she knew. Umbra. The word echoed again, carrying with it fragments of something vast. Memories that weren't hers flickered at the edges of her consciousness, stone halls lit by silver fire, voices raised in languages she shouldn't understand but did, faces with eyes that burned like stars. And underneath it all, a presence, ancient, patient, waiting. Nyelle pressed her palm against her chest, feeling her heart pound beneath her ribs. The bond's pain was gone, completely, like it had never existed. The hollow, shredded feeling where Darius had ripped their connection apart had been filled with something else, something stronger. "What the hell am I?" Her voice came out rough, raw from screaming. The words hung in the air, unanswered. She needed answers. Needed to understand what had just happened, what was still happening inside her body. The power felt dangerous, barely controlled, like holding a live wire. One wrong move and she'd... What? Explode again? Burn herself alive? Transform into something inhuman? All of the above? Nyelle took a shaky breath and started walking. Not back toward Bloodspire. She'd rather die than go back there. But she couldn't stay in the Ashlands either. Not without supplies, without shelter, without any clue what she was dealing with. She needed knowledge. And there was only one place in the abandoned territories where knowledge still existed. The ruins of Mordieth. It took 3 days to reach the ruins. 3 days of walking through desolate wasteland, drinking from stagnant pools, eating nothing because there was nothing to eat. But unlike before, her body didn't shut down, didn't weaken. The power inside her seemed to sustain her somehow, burning through her veins like fuel. She didn't sleep, couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, the memories came, sharper now, more insistent. She saw cities that didn't exist anymore, heard voices speaking words that made her teeth ache, felt the ghost of flames dancing across her skin. And underneath it all, the presence grew stronger. Not threatening. Not yet. Just watching. Waiting for something. The ruins of Mordieth rose from the wasteland like broken teeth. Once, this had been a city. A massive fortress city that predated Bloodspire by centuries. Now it was nothing but crumbling stone and ash. Its towers collapsed, its walls shattered. The first Alphas had destroyed it during the purges, burning everything and everyone inside. Or so the histories claimed. Nyelle stood at the edge of the ruins as the sun set, painting the sky blood red. The broken city sprawled before her, eerily silent. No birds, no insects, just wind whistling through empty corridors and the distant groan of unstable stone. She should turn back. This was insane. The ruins were dangerous, unstable structures, potential cave-ins, who knew what else. And there were stories about Mordieth, dark stories. People who went in and never came out, voices in the shadows, things that moved in the corners of your vision. But Nyelle had died once already. What was a little more danger? She stepped into the ruins. The temperature dropped immediately. Not physically, the air was still warm from the day's heat, but something about the space felt cold, ancient, like stepping into a tomb. Nyelle moved through the shattered streets, her footsteps echoing off broken stone. The city was massive, far larger than she'd realized from the outside. Buildings loomed on either side, their windows empty and dark, doorways gaping like mouths. She didn't know what she was looking for, just something. Anything that might explain what was happening to her. The power in her chest pulsed, almost like it was responding to the ruins, growing stronger, more active. This way. The thought wasn't hers. Nyelle froze, her heart hammering. "Who's there?" Silence. Then again, clearer. This way. Down. The presence in her mind wasn't threatening. It felt familiar, like part of her, but also separate, ancient and patient and absolutely certain. "You're the thing inside me," Nyelle said quietly. "The Umbra thing. I am you, you are me. We are what was buried." That's not cryptic at all. Down, the library. Go. Against every survival instinct she possessed, Nyelle followed the pull. It led her deeper into the ruins, down crumbling staircases and through collapsed hallways. The architecture was strange, nothing like Bloodspire's clean lines and practical design. This was older, more organic. The walls curved in ways that shouldn't work structurally. The doorways were too tall, too narrow, built for something not quite human. Finally, she reached a door, massive, stone, covered in symbols that hurt to look at directly, but intact, untouched by the destruction that had leveled everything else. Nyelle pressed her palm against the stone, and the symbols flared silver. The door opened. The library was impossible. It shouldn't exist. The ruins above had been destroyed centuries ago, burned, collapsed, reduced to ash and rubble. But this space was pristine. Shelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling, filled with books and scrolls and objects Nyelle couldn't identify. Silver light emanated from crystals embedded in the ceiling, casting everything in a soft, ethereal glow. And in the center of the room, a woman. No, not a woman. A projection. Translucent, flickering like a candle flame. She was tall, impossibly beautiful, with silver hair that moved like liquid and eyes that glowed with the same light as the crystals. She wore robes of black and silver, and when she moved, shadows moved with her. Finally, the projection said, her voice echoing strangely, "I've been waiting 300 years for one of our line to wake." Nyelle's mouth went dry. "What? Who are you?" "I am Essence. Or rather, I was Essence Kelleth, last sovereign of the Umbra line before the Purge." The projection smiled, sad and ancient. "And you, child, are my blood. Distant, diluted by centuries of hiding, but unmistakable." "I don't understand." "Sit. This will take time." Nyelle sat on the stone floor because her legs were shaking too badly to stand. The projection, Essence, settled across from her, her form flickering in and out of focus. "The Alphas didn't rise to power through strength alone," Essence began. "They rose through genocide. We, the Umbra Sovereigns, were one of several ancient bloodlines that existed before the first Alphas. We commanded shadow and flame, walked between life and death, held dominion over forces they couldn't understand and therefore feared." "So they killed you." "They tried." Essence's smile turned sharp. "But we're harder to kill than they realized. Some of us went into hiding, bred with humans, with wolves, diluting our blood to avoid detection. Your line descends from my sister, who escaped the Purge and disappeared into the wilderness. She buried her power so deep, suppressed it so completely, that it became dormant, passed down through generations as nothing more than a genetic memory. Until me. Until you." Essence leaned forward, her glowing eyes intense. "The rejection broke something in you. The trauma, the pain, it shattered whatever locks your ancestors had placed on the bloodline, and your power woke up." Nyelle's hands were shaking. "I'm not Omega." "You never were. The Umbra don't have designations the way wolves do. We're something older, something outside their hierarchy." Essence gestured around the library. "This is your birthright. Knowledge. Power. The legacy they tried to erase." "Why?" The word came out harsh. "Why hide this? Why not just tell me?" "Because they're still hunting us." Essence's expression hardened. "The royal bloodline, your precious Alpha King's family, they've spent 3 centuries making sure every trace of the Umbra was wiped from history. They know. Some of them, the ones in the inner circle, they know what we were, what we could become again, and they're terrified." Darius knew, not consciously, but his wolf knew. The moment your bond snapped into place, his instincts recognized what you were. That's why he rejected you so viciously. Not because you were Omega, because you were a threat to everything his bloodline built. The rage that rose in Nyelle was white-hot and consuming. "He destroyed me because he was afraid? He destroyed you because he's exactly like his ancestors, arrogant, brutal, and convinced that might makes right." Essence's form flickered. "But he made a mistake. He thought breaking the bond would neutralize you. Instead, he set you free." Nyelle stood abruptly, pacing. The power in her chest was responding to her anger, building, growing hotter. "What do I do with this? How do I control it?" "You train. You learn. You become what you were always meant to be." Essence rose as well. "I can teach you. Everything I knew, I stored here before my death. Combat techniques, power manipulation, the old languages. How to walk between shadows. how to call fire without burning yourself, how to make them pay. The words came out cold and flat. Essence studied her for a long moment. Revenge is a valid goal, but it's not sustainable. What comes after? I don't care about after. Nyelle's voice was sharp. I care about making Darius Vornhale understand what he did, making him feel it. Then you'll need to be stronger than him, faster, smarter, more ruthless. Essence's projection moved closer. Are you willing to do what that takes? Because training with me won't be gentle. The Umbra way is brutal. We break bones to make them stronger. We burn flesh to teach control. We push until you shatter, and then we teach you to rebuild yourself harder than before. Nyelle met those glowing eyes without flinching. I've already been broken. I'm ready. Good. Essence smiled, and it was terrifying. Then we begin now, so the training was hell. Worse than hell. Essence hadn't been exaggerating about the Umbra methods. Every day, if day meant anything in the timeless library, Nyelle was pushed past her limits and then forced to keep going. The projection couldn't physically touch her, but she didn't need to. The library itself responded to Essence's commands, creating obstacles, attacks, scenarios designed to test Nyelle in every possible way. Combat training came first. Nyelle had never fought in her life. Omegas didn't fight. They submitted, endured, survived through compliance. Essence broke that conditioning with ruthless efficiency. Block! Nyelle threw her arms up as a shadow construct slammed into her, sending her sprawling. She hit the stone floor hard, tasting blood. Too slow, again! She scrambled up, her ribs screaming. The shadow construct reformed, larger this time, and charged. Nyelle dodged left. Too late. The construct caught her shoulder, spinning her around. She went down again. You're thinking like prey, Essence said, her voice sharp. Prey gets eaten. Predators survive. Again. Nyelle pushed herself up, panting. I can't. Can't isn't in your vocabulary anymore. Again! The construct charged. This time something shifted in Nyelle. Instead of dodging, she moved forward, met the attack head on. Her hands came up, not to block, but to strike, and silver fire erupted from her palms, shredding through the shadow construct like paper. Silence. Nyelle stared at her hands, at the dying flames. Better, Essence said, satisfaction in her voice. Again, 10 more. And this time, don't wait for them to attack. You attack first. The sessions blurred together. Combat, power control, languages, history. Essence poured centuries of knowledge into Nyelle's head, forcing her to absorb information at a pace that should have been impossible. But it wasn't impossible, because the power was helping. The Umbra bloodline carried its own kind of memory, muscle memory, combat instincts, linguistic patterns embedded in the DNA itself. Every time Essence taught her something, it felt less like learning and more like remembering. Weeks passed, maybe months. Time didn't work right in the library. Nyelle's body changed. Not dramatically, she didn't suddenly become tall or muscular or classically powerful looking, but she moved differently now, faster, more fluid. Her reflexes sharpened to the point where she could snatch arrows out of the air without thinking. Her strength increased, not alpha level, but far beyond what she'd been. And the power became an extension of her will. She learned to call silver fire with a thought, shape shadows into weapons, move through darkness like water. Learned the old combat forms, fighting styles designed for beings with abilities far beyond normal wolves. Learned to manipulate her own biology, pushing past pain, past exhaustion, past the limits that should have killed her. Your ancestors could walk through solid objects, Essence explained during one session. Phase through walls, become incorporeal. You're not strong enough for that yet, but you will be. How long did it take you to learn? 40 years. I don't have 40 years. No. Essence's expression was grave. You don't, which means we push harder. Harder turned out to mean nearly dying, repeatedly. Essence created scenarios that pushed Nyelle to the absolute edge. Combat against multiple opponents, environmental hazards, situations where using her power meant destroying herself in the process. Every time Nyelle thought she couldn't take anymore, couldn't survive another round, Essence would push harder. You want revenge? The projection would say, her voice cold. Revenge requires sacrifice, pain, Blood? Are you willing to pay that price? And every time, Nyelle would drag herself back up and keep going, because the alternative was going back to being nothing, and she'd rather die. Atta said. One day, though she'd long since lost track of actual days, Essence called a halt to training. Come, she said. There's something you need to see. She led Nyelle to a section of the library Nyelle hadn't explored yet. The shelves here were different, filled not with books, but with artifacts, weapons, armor, objects that hummed with power. Essence stopped in front of a particular shelf and gestured. A mirror. Full length, framed in black metal covered in silver symbols. Look, Essence commanded. Nyelle stepped in front of the mirror and didn't recognize herself. The girl staring back was still her, same face, same basic features. But everything else had changed. Her eyes were different, harder, with a silver undertone that hadn't been there before. Her posture was different, no longer hunched and apologetic, but straight, balanced, ready. Her hands, once trembling and uncertain, now hung loose and relaxed at her sides, but there was a tension in them, a readiness. She looked dangerous. This is who you really are, Essence said quietly. Not the broken Omega the king rejected, not the servant who scrubbed floors. This is Nyelle Vireth, last daughter of the Umbra line, sovereign, warrior, force of nature. Nyelle stared at her reflection, at the stranger wearing her face. What happens now? She asked. Now you decide. Essence moved to stand beside her, their reflections side by side. You can stay here, continue training, become even stronger, master abilities I haven't taught you yet, or I go back. Yes, Nyelle's hands clenched into fists. I'm not ready. You'll never feel ready. Power isn't about being ready. It's about being willing. Essence met her eyes in the mirror. You're strong enough to make Darius notice, to make him remember what he did. Whether you're strong enough to survive what comes after, that's up to you. He'll try to kill me. Probably. His whole court will try to kill me. Almost certainly. And if I win, Essence smiled, sharp and vicious. Then you remake the world in your image. Tear down his hierarchy. Prove that the Umbra were superior all along. Make them regret ever thinking they could erase us. Nyelle turned away from the mirror, from the stranger wearing her face who looked like she could burn kingdoms. How do I get back to Bloodspire? There's a portal, old Umbra technology. It'll take you to the forest outside the city walls. After that, you walk in the front gate and let them see what they created. Just like that? Just like that. Essence's projection was already fading. My time is limited. The magic sustaining this library won't last much longer. I've given you everything I can. The rest is yours. Wait! Nyelle reached out instinctively, even though she knew her hand would pass through the projection. I don't know if I can do this alone. You're not alone. You carry all of us with you, every sovereign who came before, every drop of Umbra blood that refused to die. Essence's voice was growing fainter. Make them remember us, Nyelle. Make them understand what they destroyed. And if you can... The projection flickered violently. If you can, be better than we were. Don't just seek revenge. Build something new. Something that doesn't require genocide to maintain power. That's asking a lot. I know. Essence smiled one last time. But you're Umbra. We've never done anything the easy way. She vanished. The library's light dimmed, the crystals losing their glow one by one. Nyelle stood in the growing darkness, alone, the weight of everything she'd learned pressing down on her shoulders. She should feel afraid, should feel uncertain, but all she felt was rage. Cold, patient, calculating. Darius Vornhale had rejected her to protect his throne. Fine. She'd take his throne and make him watch as she burned his legacy to ash. Nyelle found the portal chamber exactly where Essence had described, a circular room deep in the library's heart, its walls covered in glowing symbols. In the center, an archway of black stone hummed with power. She stepped through without hesitation. The forest outside Bloodspire was exactly as she remembered it. Dense pine, rocky soil, the sound of a stream somewhere nearby. Nyelle emerged from the portal into twilight, the last rays of sun painting the sky purple and gold. How long had she been gone? Weeks? Months? It didn't matter. She was back. Nyelle made her way through the forest, moving silently. Her training had taught her how to mask her presence, how to move through terrain without leaving traces. She reached the edge of the tree line and stopped, looking out at Bloodspire. The city sprawled before her, massive and arrogant. The palace rose from its center like a dagger, all sharp towers and cold stone. Lights were beginning to appear in windows as night fell. From here, she could almost make out the great hall where her life had ended, where it had also begun. Nyelle took a breath, feeling the power coil tight in her chest. This was it, the point of no return. If she walked through those gates, everything changed. There'd be no going back to obscurity, to being forgotten. She'd be declaring war on the most powerful alpha in the realm and everyone loyal to him. She could die. Probably would die. But at least she'd die as herself, not as the pathetic Omega who'd begged for acceptance, as the Umbra Sovereign who'd come to collect a debt. Nyelle stepped out of the trees and started walking toward the city gates. She didn't hide, didn't skulk or sneak. She walked straight down the main road, in full view of anyone watching. The guards at the gate saw her coming from 100 yards away. 2 betas, armed with spears, looking bored and half asleep, until they got a good look at her. Both straightened immediately, hands tightening on their weapons. "Halt!" one of them called out. "State your business." Nyelle kept walking. "I said halt!" She stopped 10 feet from them, close enough that they could see her clearly in the torchlight, close enough that they could see her eyes and the silver glow beneath the surface. "I'm here to see the king," she said calmly. The guards exchanged glances. "The king doesn't see anyone without an appointment," the first guard said, trying to sound authoritative but failing. "Especially not—" He cut off, squinting at her. "Do I know you?" "No," Nyelle said. "But you will." She released just a fraction of her power, barely a whisper, and shadows rippled around her feet. Both guards stepped back, weapons coming up. "What the hell?" "Tell Darius Vornhale," Nyelle said, her voice cutting through their panic like a blade, "that the Omega he rejected has returned, and this time I'm not asking for permission." Before they could respond, she walked past them. Neither guard moved to stop her. They were too busy staring, wide-eyed and shaking, as Nyelle Vireth walked through the gates of Bloodspire for the first time as something other than prey. The city streets were crowded, merchants closing shops, workers heading home, the usual evening bustle. People moved aside as Nyelle passed, though most didn't seem to know why. Something about her presence made them uncomfortable, made them want to create distance. Good. Let them be uncomfortable. She made her way toward the palace, following streets she'd walked 1,000 times before. But this time, she wasn't carrying a pitcher or hauling buckets or keeping her eyes down. This time, she walked like she owned the ground beneath her feet. The palace guard saw her coming from the main courtyard. 4 alphas this time, better trained, better armed. They didn't look bored, they looked ready. "That's far enough," the lead alpha, a scarred man with cold eyes, commanded. "Turn around and leave. Now." "No," Nyelle said simply. "We will use force." "Try." The alpha's eyes narrowed. He gestured to his companions, and all 4 moved to surround her. Standard intimidation tactic. Show overwhelming force, make the threat back down. Nyelle stood perfectly still, hands loose at her sides, watching them position themselves. "Last chance," the lead alpha growled. "Leave, or we drag you out." "I have a better idea," Nyelle said. "You go inside and tell your king that Nyelle Vireth is here. He'll want to know." Nyelle, the alpha's expression shifted from aggression to confusion. "Wait, the Omega girl? The one he rejected?" "That's the one." "You're supposed to be dead." "Disappointing, I know." Nyelle smiled, and it was all teeth. "Now, are you going to deliver my message, or do I have to walk through you to do it myself?" The alphas looked at each other, uncertain. Then the lead one made a mistake. He reached for her. Nyelle moved. Faster than his eyes could track, she sidestepped his grab, caught his wrist, and twisted. Not hard enough to break, not yet, but hard enough to make her point. The alpha gasped, his knees hitting the cobblestones as pain shot through his arm. The other 3 reacted immediately, lunging for her. Nyelle released the first alpha and flowed backward, shadows rippling around her. One attacker's hand passed through empty air where she'd been standing a heartbeat before. Another stumbled as his target simply wasn't there anymore. She reappeared behind them, perfectly calm. "I don't want to hurt you," she said quietly. I'm not here for you. But if you make me go through you, I will. And you won't enjoy it.
The lead alpha was back on his feet, his face twisted with rage and humiliation. You think you can threaten us? You're nothing but—
Be very careful how you finish that sentence, Nyelle interrupted, and this time she let more power show. Silver light flickered in her eyes, shadows pooled at her feet, and the temperature dropped 10 degrees in an instant. Because I'm not the same girl you threw out of the Great Hall, and if you try to put your hands on me again, I'll show you exactly what I've become. Silence. Then, stand down. The voice came from the palace entrance. A new figure emerged, a woman in elegant robes, middle-aged, with sharp features and calculating eyes. Lady Vireth, one of the king's advisors. Nyelle recognized her from the lunar rite. The alphas immediately stepped back, though they kept their weapons ready. Lady Vireth approached slowly, studying Nyelle with undisguised curiosity. So you're alive, she said. Interesting. We assumed you died in the Ashlands. Sorry to disappoint.
On the contrary, this is far more intriguing. Vireth circled her slowly, like examining a fascinating specimen. You look different, feel different. What happened to you out there? I found something the first alphas tried very hard to erase. Nyelle met the woman's gaze steadily. And now I'm here to discuss terms. Terms? Vireth's eyebrow rose. You're in no position to—
I'm in every position. Nyelle's voice hardened. You can let me speak to Darius peacefully, or I can force my way in. Either way, this conversation is happening tonight. Your choice is how many people get hurt in the process. Vireth studied her for another long moment. Then she smiled, thin and calculating. Follow me. But know that if you try anything inside, there are 50 guards between you and the king, and they will kill you. They can try, Nyelle said. Just like these 4 tried. She followed Vireth into the palace. The corridors were exactly as she remembered. Cold marble, soaring ceilings, tapestries depicting the glory of the Alpha bloodline. But walking through them now felt different. She wasn't invisible anymore. Every servant they passed stopped and stared. Every guard tensed as she approached. They felt it, felt the power radiating from her like heat from a forge. Vireth led her to a receiving room. Formal, imposing, designed to make visitors feel small. High ceilings, a raised platform at one end, guards stationed at every exit, and in the center of the platform, seated on a throne that was just a hair short of the one in the Great Hall, Darius Vornhale. He looked exactly the same. Same cold gray eyes, same scarred jaw, same aura of absolute authority. But when their eyes met, the bond flared. Not the old bond. That was gone, severed beyond repair. This was something new, something that shouldn't exist. A connection forged not by fate, but by power, recognizing power. Darius's expression didn't change, but Nyelle saw his jaw tighten, saw his knuckles go white where they gripped the armrests. He felt it too. So, he said, his voice carefully controlled, the little Omega survived after all. I'm not Omega, Nyelle said quietly. I never was. No? He leaned forward slightly, his gaze sharp. Then what are you? Nyelle smiled, and let her power show, just for a moment. Silver light flared in her eyes, shadows rippled across the floor, and the temperature in the room dropped so fast that frost formed on the windows. Every guard in the room tensed, hands going to weapons. But Darius didn't flinch. He just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke, and his voice was colder than she'd ever heard it. I should have killed you when I had the chance. Yes, Nyelle agreed. You should have, but you were too arrogant, too sure of yourself. You thought breaking the bond would destroy me. She took a step closer to the platform. Instead, you set me free, and now I'm back. Not to beg, not to plead, but to show you what you created. You think you can threaten me? Darius rose from his throne, his alpha dominance crashing down like a physical force. In my own palace, surrounded by my guards? You're either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Neither. Nyelle held her ground against the pressure of his dominance, her own power rising to meet it. I'm just done being afraid of you. The two forces collided, alpha dominance versus Umbra sovereignty, and the room shook. Guards stumbled, windows cracked. Vireth grabbed onto a pillar for support. But neither Nyelle nor Darius moved. They stood locked in a battle of wills, power crackling between them like lightning. Finally, Darius spoke, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "What do you want?" "A fight," Nyelle said. 3 days from now, you and me, in the arena, in front of the entire court. Why would I agree to that? Because if you don't, I'll start killing your people, one by one, until you have no choice. The threat hung in the air, stark and brutal. Darius's eyes narrowed. "You're bluffing. Try me." Nyelle let more power show, silver flames dancing across her fingertips. "I've spent months learning what I am, what I can do, and I'm ready to demonstrate. So you can either face me honorably in the arena, or I can tear through this palace until I reach you anyway. Your choice." Silence stretched between them. Then Darius smiled, sharp and vicious. 3 days, he said, in the arena. But understand this, Omega. When I defeat you, and I will, I'm going to make sure everyone watches you break. I'm going to destroy you so completely that people will forget you ever dared challenge me. "We'll see," Nyelle said. She turned and walked toward the door. "One more thing," Darius called out. She stopped but didn't turn around. "Why did you really come back? Revenge? Pride? Or do you actually think you can win?" Nyelle looked back over her shoulder, meeting his eyes one last time. "I came back because you need to understand what you destroyed when you rejected me. Not an Omega, not a weak, pathetic servant." Her voice dropped, cold and certain. "You destroyed the last chance this kingdom had at evolution, at moving past the brutal hierarchy you and your ancestors built on genocide and fear. And now, instead of a partner who might have helped you build something better, you have an enemy who's going to tear your legacy apart." 3 days, Nyelle," Darius interrupted, his voice like steel, "and then we'll see who's destroying whose legacy." Nyelle walked out of the receiving room with her head high, shadows trailing behind her like a cloak. The guards parted to let her pass, their faces tight with barely concealed fear. Good. Let them be afraid. Let them all understand that she wasn't the same broken girl who'd crawled out of this palace months ago. But as soon as the palace doors closed behind her, the bravado cracked. Her hands started shaking, not from fear, from adrenaline crash, from the sheer weight of what she'd just done. She'd walked into the Alpha King's palace, threatened him in front of his guards, and challenged him to public combat. There was no going back now. Nyelle made her way through the darkening streets, keeping to the shadows out of habit. She needed somewhere to stay, somewhere to prepare for the fight in 3 days. The old servants' quarters were obviously out of the question. Every inn in the city would report her presence to the palace within hours, which left the underbelly. Every city had one, the parts that didn't appear on official maps, where people went when they didn't want to be found. Bloodspire's underbelly ran through the old district near the eastern wall, a maze of narrow alleys and crumbling buildings that the city guard rarely bothered to patrol. Nyelle found a tavern that looked appropriately disreputable, peeling paint, broken windows, a sign that might have once said something but was now just illegible scratches. She pushed through the door into a dim interior that smelled of cheap alcohol, unwashed bodies, and desperation. Perfect. The conversation died the moment she entered. Every head turned, assessing her. Threat or prey? Dangerous or vulnerable? The usual calculations of predators sizing up new territory. Nyelle walked to the bar, ignoring the stares. The bartender was a grizzled beta with scarred knuckles and eyes that had seen everything twice. He looked her up and down with professional disinterest. "We don't serve your kind here," he said flatly. "My kind?" "Palace folk, nobles, whatever you are." He jerked his chin toward the door. "Out." Nyelle pulled a small leather pouch from her pocket, one she'd taken from the library before leaving, filled with old coins that were probably worth a fortune to collectors, and dropped it on the bar. The heavy clink of metal silenced the room again. "I need a room for 3 days," she said quietly. "Somewhere private, somewhere no one asks questions." The bartender stared at the pouch, picked it up, weighed it. His expression didn't change, but his eyes widened slightly. "Upstairs. End of the hall. Don't cause trouble." "Wouldn't dream of it." Nyelle took the key, he slid across the bar and headed for the stairs, feeling every eye in the room tracking her movement. She'd bought their silence with that pouch. But silence in places like this was a temporary commodity. Someone would talk. Eventually. She just needed 3 days. The room was exactly what she'd expected. Small, dingy, a bed that looked like it had diseases, and a window that didn't close properly. But it was private, and the door had a decent lock. Nyelle sat on the edge of the bed and finally let herself breathe. 3 days until she faced Darius in the arena. 3 days to prepare. 3 days to figure out if she was actually strong enough to survive this, or if she'd just signed her own death warrant. Her hands were still shaking. The next 2 days passed in a haze of preparation. Nyelle barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she was back in the receiving room, feeling the crushing weight of Darius's dominance, seeing the cold certainty in his eyes when he'd promised to destroy her. The memory made her power flare, silver flames dancing across her skin in the darkness. She trained in the room Form's essence had taught her: shadow manipulation, fire control. The space was too small for real combat practice, but she could at least keep her reflexes sharp, keep her power flowing smoothly instead of erupting in uncontrolled bursts. On the second night, someone knocked on her door. Nyelle froze, power instantly coiling in her palms. "It's just me," a voice called through the wood. Female, familiar. "Can we talk?" Nyelle opened the door a crack. Mara stood in the hallway, the beta servant girl who'd sometimes snuck her extra bread back when Nyelle had been invisible. She looked older now, tired, with dark circles under her eyes. "How did you find me?" Nyelle asked. "Everyone knows you're back. The whole city's talking about it." Mara glanced down the hallway nervously. "Can I come in? I have information you need." Nyelle hesitated, then stepped aside. Mara slipped into the room and closed the door behind her. For a long moment, she just stared at Nyelle, her expression unreadable. "You look different," she finally said. "I am different." "Yeah, I can see that." Mara sat on the room's single chair, her hands clasped tight in her lap. "Listen, I don't have much time. I'm risking a lot just being here, but I thought you should know. The fight tomorrow? It's a trap." Nyelle's blood went cold. "What kind of trap?" "Darius isn't going to fight fair. He can't." Mara's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "You scared him, Nyelle, really scared him. I've worked in the palace for 15 years and I've never seen him like this. He's been in meetings with his war council nonstop since you showed up. They're planning something." "What?" "I don't know exactly, but I overheard Lady Vireth talking to one of the generals. Something about containment protocols and making sure she doesn't leave the arena alive." Mara leaned forward. "They're going to kill you, not in a fair fight. They're going to make sure you die no matter what happens." Nyelle's jaw tightened. "Then I'll just have to be ready for it." "You're not listening." Mara's voice cracked with frustration. "You can't win this. Even if you beat Darius, even if you're stronger than him, they have the entire royal guard. They have mages. They have weapons you don't know about. Old weapons from the purges, designed specifically to kill things like—" She cut off, but the implication hung in the air. "Things like Umbra." "How do you know about that?" Nyelle asked quietly. Mara's expression shifted to something complicated: guilt, fear, and something else. "Because I'm not just a servant. I'm an informant for the resistance." "The what?" "The resistance. People who want to see the alpha hierarchy torn down. Omegas, betas, even some alphas who are tired of living under Darius's rule." Mara stood pacing in the small space. "We've been watching you, even before the rejection. We knew something was different about you, but we didn't know what. And then you disappeared and we thought you were dead. But when you came back, you saw an opportunity. We saw hope." Mara turned to face her. "Don't you understand? You're the first person in 300 years who might actually be able to challenge them, to prove that their power isn't absolute. But not if you walk into their trap tomorrow." Nyelle shook her head. "I can't back down. If I run now, I'm admitting they were right to reject me, that I'm nothing." "You're not nothing. That's the point." Mara grabbed her shoulders, forcing eye contact. "You're something they're terrified of. Use that. But use it smart. Don't give them the advantage of choosing the battlefield." "What are you suggesting?" "Delay the fight. Demand different terms. Public negotiation instead of combat. Anything that gets you out of that arena tomorrow." Mara's grip tightened. "Please, Nyelle, I know you want revenge. But revenge doesn't mean anything if you're dead." Nyelle pulled away, her mind racing.
Everything Mara was saying made sense, tactically, strategically. It was the smart move. But something about it felt wrong, felt like retreating, like proving that she was still afraid of Darius, still letting him dictate the terms of her existence. "I'll think about it," she said finally. Mara's expression crumbled. "That means you're going to go through with it anyway." "It means I'll think about it." "You're going to get yourself killed."
Maybe. Nyelle met her eyes. But at least I'll die on my terms, not theirs. Mara stared at her for a long moment, then shook her head sadly. You sound just like them. The old sovereigns, Essence and her line, proud, uncompromising, dead. She headed for the door. Mara. If you survive tomorrow, Mara said without turning around, find the resistance. We gather at the old temple ruins on the north side, midnight every third day. We could use someone like you. If you live. She left. Nyelle stood alone in the silent room, Mara's warning echoing in her head. Trap. Containment protocols. Weapons designed to kill Umbra. She should be afraid. Should reconsider. But all she felt was rage. Let them try their trap. Let them bring their weapons and their protocols and their certainty that she could be controlled. She'd show them exactly what happened when you tried to cage something that was born to burn. The arena was packed. Nyelle could hear the crowd from outside the building. Thousands of voices raised in anticipation, bloodlust, excitement. They'd come to see their king remind everyone why he ruled, to watch an upstart Omega get put back in her place. They had no idea what they were actually about to witness. She stood in the preparation chamber beneath the arena, a small stone room with a single barred window looking out onto the fighting floor above. Guards had escorted her here an hour ago and locked the door behind them. Standard procedure for arena combat, apparently. Keep the fighters separated until the match began. Nyelle tested the power coiling in her chest. It responded immediately, eager, ready. Shadows pooled at her feet. Silver light flickered across her knuckles. She was as ready as she'd ever be. The door opened. But it wasn't a guard come to escort her to the arena. It was Vireth. The advisor swept into the room like she owned it, her expression cool and calculating. She gestured, and the guards closed the door behind her, giving them privacy. Impressive turnout, Vireth said conversationally, as if they were discussing the weather. Every noble in the kingdom showed up. They're calling it the fight of the century. What do you want? Nyelle kept her voice flat. To make you an offer. Vireth circled her slowly, assessing. You're strong, stronger than we anticipated, and you're clearly not going to just disappear quietly, so I'm prepared to negotiate. I'm listening. Walk away. Leave Bloodspire. We'll give you territory in the outer provinces. Your own lands, your own title. You can build whatever society you want there, establish your own rules. We won't interfere. In exchange for what? You never come back. You never challenge Darius again. You never speak of what you are or what happened to you. Vireth stopped in front of her. It's a generous offer, Nyelle. More than generous. You get power, freedom, survival. All you have to do is walk away. Nyelle studied the woman's face, looking for the trap, found it in the slight tension around her eyes. You're afraid, Nyelle said quietly. All of you. You know I might actually win. Don't be ridiculous. Darius is powerful, but he's also predictable. He fights the way alphas have always fought, through dominance, through force, through the assumption that might makes right. Nyelle smiled without humor. I fight different, and you know it. Vireth's expression hardened. Then you're a fool. Because if you step into that arena, you're not fighting just Darius. You're fighting an entire system that's existed for 3 centuries, and systems don't lose to individuals. We'll see. Last chance, girl. Take the offer. Live. No. Vireth stared at her for a long moment. Then she sighed, almost regretful. I tried to give you a way out, remember that. She turned and walked to the door, knocked twice. The guards opened it immediately, but before she left, Vireth looked back. One more thing you should know. About the rejection. Nyelle's chest tightened. What about it? It wasn't random. Darius didn't just happen to reject you because you were Omega. Vireth's smile was sharp and cruel. He was ordered to. The world tilted. What? The royal bloodline has protocols, ancient ones. If a bond forms with anyone suspected of carrying dormant Umbra genetics, it must be severed immediately, violently, to prevent exactly what happened, the power waking up. Varane's eyes glittered. We've been tracking your family line for generations, watching, waiting, making sure that if anyone from the Umbra bloodline ever surfaced, we'd know. Nyelle's blood had gone ice cold. You knew, before the ceremony. You knew what I was, not what you were, what you could become. Varane shrugged. The bond forming was actually perfect. It gave us an excuse to reject you publicly, humiliate you, make sure you were too broken to ever be a threat. We thought the trauma would keep the power dormant. We were wrong. You orchestrated the whole thing. The words came out barely a whisper. The rejection, the humiliation, making sure I was destroyed in front of everyone. That was the plan all along. It was necessary. Your ancestors were a plague that almost destroyed the world. We couldn't risk you becoming what they were. So you broke me instead. We tried. Varane's expression was cold. Clearly, we should have just killed you. Our mistake. One we're about to correct. She left. The door slammed shut. Nyelle stood frozen, her mind struggling to process what she'd just heard. It wasn't random. It wasn't because she was weak or omega or unworthy. They'd known what she was, known what she could become, and they'd orchestrated her destruction specifically to prevent it. Darius hadn't rejected her out of disgust or arrogance. He'd rejected her because he'd been ordered to. The bond, the sacred fate-chosen bond that was supposed to be inviolable, had been nothing but a tool. A convenient excuse to break her so completely that her power would never wake up. But it had backfired, spectacularly. The rage that rose in Nyelle was unlike anything she'd ever felt. Not hot and explosive, cold, calculating, absolute. They'd played her, used her, turned what should have been the most important moment of her life into a staged execution. And she'd fallen for it, had believed them when they called her nothing, had internalized their disgust, had almost died in the Ashlands thinking she deserved it. But she hadn't died. She'd evolved, and now they were going to pay for every second of pain they'd caused. The door opened again. This time it was guards, 4 of them, heavily armed. "Time," the lead one said shortly. "Let's go." Nyelle followed them up the stairs and into the blinding sunlight of the arena floor. The roar of the crowd hit like a physical wall. Thousands of people packed into the stone seats, screaming, chanting, baying for blood. The arena itself was massive, a circular fighting floor maybe 100 feet across, surrounded by 30-foot walls to keep combatants from escaping, or to keep them trapped. Darius was already there, standing in the center of the arena. He wore light armor, leather and chainmail, nothing that would slow him down but enough to turn a blade. His expression was cold and focused as Nyelle approached. Above them, in the royal box, Lady Varane sat with the king's council. Watching, waiting. An official stepped forward, an ancient beta in ceremonial robes, his voice magically amplified to carry across the arena. "Combatants, face each other." Nyelle and Darius stood 10 feet apart, eyes locked. "This is a formal challenge under ancient law. Combat to submission or death. No interference, no mercy. Do you both accept these terms?" "I accept," Darius said. Nyelle opened her mouth to respond, and the arena floor exploded beneath her feet. She dove sideways on pure instinct, rolling as massive silver chains erupted from the ground, snapping toward her like striking serpents. The crowd screamed. Darius didn't move, his expression unchanged. He'd known. Of course he'd known. Nyelle scrambled to her feet as more chains burst from the floor, the walls, the ceiling. They moved with unnatural speed and precision, clearly controlled by someone, multiple someones, hidden around the arena. Mages, using weapons designed specifically to contain Umbra. "I'm sorry," Darius called out over the chaos, and he actually sounded regretful. "But you were never going to leave here alive. This isn't a fight, it's an execution." The chains wrapped around Nyelle's wrist before she could dodge. She felt them immediately. Not just metal, but something else. Runes carved into the links that burned against her skin, suppressing her power, draining it. More chains found her ankles, her other wrist, her throat. She hit the ground hard, gasping, as the chains pulled tight, pinning her to the arena floor. Her power flickered, guttering like a candle in a windstorm. The runes on the chains glowed brighter, feeding on her energy, using it against her. The crowd had gone silent, watching. Darius walked closer, stopping just outside the web of chains holding her down. "You should have taken Varane's offer," he said quietly. "I actually would have let you go. Would have given you the territory, the freedom. But you had to make this personal, had to demand a public fight." "You're a coward," Nyelle spat, struggling against the chains. "This isn't a fight. You're just proving I was right. You're terrified of me." "I'm being practical." Darius crouched down, meeting her eyes. "You're dangerous, unstable, a threat to everything we've built. And yes, I'm afraid of what you could become. I'd be an idiot not to be." "Then kill me," Nyelle bared her teeth. "If I'm so dangerous, stop talking and finish it." Darius stood, drawing a blade from his belt. The metal gleamed silver in the sunlight, except it wasn't silver. It was something else. Something that made Nyelle's power recoil instinctively. Umbra Killer. A weapon forged during the purges specifically to execute her kind. "I want you to know something first," Darius said, and his voice was cold. "The bond? I felt it too. Felt the pull, the connection. For one moment I thought—" He cut off, his jaw tight. "But my duty is to the throne, to the kingdom, not to some ancient bloodline that nearly destroyed the world. So yes, I rejected you. And yes, it was calculated, but it was also necessary." He raised the blade. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry it had to be you." The blade descended. Nyelle closed her eyes. And something inside her broke. Not her body, not her power. Something deeper. A lock she hadn't known existed. A seal placed on her bloodline generations ago, meant to suppress the full extent of Umbra power. A seal that had cracked when Darius rejected her. And now, it shattered completely. Power erupted from Nyelle like a detonation. Silver-black flames exploded outward, vaporizing the chains holding her, sending Darius flying backward. The arena floor cracked. The walls trembled. And Nyelle stood, wreathed in fire that didn't burn her skin. She could feel it now, the full extent of what she was. Not just a descendant of the Umbra, not just someone with dormant power. She was a sovereign, trueborn, complete. The chains that had been forged to contain beings like her melted like candle wax. The suppression runes shattered, and the mages controlling them, hidden in alcoves around the arena, screamed as their connection to the weapons backfired, feedback slamming into their minds. Darius was back on his feet, staring at her with something between horror and awe. "What are you?" he breathed. "Everything you tried to destroy," Nyelle said, and then she moved. Faster than his eyes could track, she closed the distance between them. Her hand caught his throat, lifting him off his feet with strength that shouldn't be possible from someone her size. The crowd was screaming. Guards were pouring into the arena. Arrows flew toward her from the walls. Nyelle burned them out of the air without looking. Her eyes, fully silver now, glowing with power that hadn't been seen in centuries, locked onto Darius's face. "You took everything from me," she said softly. "My dignity, my future, my chance at happiness, all because you were afraid." Darius's hands clawed at her wrist, his face turning red. "Please? And now you want mercy?" Nyelle's grip tightened. "Now you want me to be better than you were?" She could kill him, right now, crush his throat, let him die knowing he'd failed to contain her. That everything he'd done to destroy her had only made her stronger. It would be justice. It would be satisfying. It would be wrong. The realization hit her like cold water. If she killed him here like this, she proved them right. Proved that the Umbra were unstable, violent, dangerous. That the purges had been necessary. That power like hers couldn't be allowed to exist. She'd become exactly what they'd feared. Exactly what they'd used to justify genocide. Nyelle released him. Darius collapsed, gasping, his hands at his throat. She looked up at the royal box, at Varane and the council, at all the nobles who'd orchestrated her destruction. "I'm not killing him," she called out, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent arena. "Not because he deserves mercy, but because I'm not going to prove you right. You spent 3 centuries convincing the world that people like me were monsters. I'm not giving you that satisfaction." She turned back to Darius, who was struggling to his feet. "But this isn't over," she said quietly, for his ears alone. "You're going to live with what you did. Live with the knowledge that you created your worst nightmare, that everything you tried to prevent, you caused." Nyelle stepped back, her power still blazing around her like a second skin. "And when I'm done dismantling everything you've built, every corrupt system, every brutal hierarchy, every lie you've told to maintain power, you're going to remember this moment. Remember that you had a chance to choose different, to accept the bond, to build something better." She started walking toward the arena exit. Guards blocked her path, weapons raised. "Move," Nyelle said. They moved. She walked through them like water, her power keeping them at bay without her having to strike a single blow. Behind her, Darius called out, his voice ragged, "This isn't over either. You think you've won? You've just declared war on every alpha in the kingdom. They'll hunt you, kill everyone who helps you, burn the world to ash before they let you tear down what we've built." Nyelle stopped at the arena entrance, looked back one last time.
"Then let them try. I've already died once. I'm not afraid anymore." She left the arena. Behind her, chaos erupted. Shouts, arguments, the council screaming orders. But none of it mattered, because Nyelle Vireth had just done something no one had managed in 300 years. She'd walked into the heart of alpha power, challenged their king, survived their trap, and walked out alive. And now the real war began. Nyelle made it 3 blocks before the assassins found her. They came from the rooftops, 4 of them, moving with the precision of trained killers. No warnings, no declarations, just crossbow bolts whistling through the air toward her head. She burned 2 out of the air, dodged the 3rd, caught the 4th with her bare hand. The assassins dropped to street level, drawing blades that glowed with the same sick light as Darius's weapon. Umbra killers. "How many of those did they make?" Nyelle muttered. The assassins didn't answer. They just attacked. Nyelle fought like Essence had taught her. Fluid, brutal, efficient. She didn't waste energy on flashy displays, just killed, fast and clean, because these people weren't giving her a choice. 3 went down in less than a minute. The 4th managed to get close, his blade slicing across her ribs before she could dodge. Pain flared, sharp and immediate. The weapon did something to her healing, preventing the wound from closing the way it should. Nyelle grabbed his wrist, twisted until something cracked, and drove her other palm into his chest. Silver fire erupted through him, burning from the inside out. He dropped. She stood alone in the street, breathing hard, blood seeping through her shirt. The wound hurt, really hurt, and wasn't healing, which meant more assassins were coming, with more Umbra killer weapons, and eventually they'd get lucky. She needed help, needed allies, needed the resistance. Mara's words echoed in her head. Find the resistance. Old temple ruins, north side, midnight every 3rd day. What day was it? She'd lost track. Didn't matter. She'd wait at the ruins if she had to, because going back to that tavern room meant getting cornered, and she couldn't fight the entire kingdom alone. Not yet, anyway. Nyelle pressed her hand against the wound on her ribs, gritting her teeth against the pain, and started walking north. Behind her, more shouts rose, more guards, more hunters. The war Darius had predicted was already starting, and Nyelle, bleeding, exhausted, hunted by an entire kingdom, had never felt more alive, or more terrified, because she'd just realized something the moment that 4th assassin's blade had cut her. She wasn't invincible, wasn't unstoppable. She was powerful, yes, dangerous, absolutely, but she could still die, and they were going to try their absolute hardest to make sure she did. Nyelle pressed harder against the wound on her ribs, feeling blood seep between her fingers. The pain was getting worse, spreading like poison through her veins. The Umbra killer blade had done something to her healing factor, corrupting it, twisting it so that instead of knitting flesh back together, her body kept tearing itself apart from the inside. Every step felt like walking on broken glass, every breath like inhaling fire. She needed to move faster, but her legs were lead weights dragging through mud. The streets were emptying around her. Word traveled fast in cities like this. The Omega who'd challenged the king was loose, bleeding, dangerous. Shutters slammed closed like gunshots, doors locked with decisive clicks. People melted into their homes, leaving the cobblestone streets empty, except for shadows and the echo of her footsteps.
Smart people. Because behind her, the sounds of pursuit were getting closer. Not just closer, organized. The scattered shouts from earlier had transformed into coordinated movements. Professional. Military. The Royal Guard. Hunting. Nyelle ducked into an alley, her back hitting the cold stone wall hard enough to jar her ribs. She bit down on a scream, tasting copper. Her vision swam, darkness creeping in from the edges. No, not yet. She couldn't pass out here. Couldn't let them find her like this, weak, helpless, proving every cruel thing they'd ever said about her. The old temple ruins. North side. Midnight meetings every third day. Mara's words echoed in her head like a lifeline. But the ruins were miles away, and Nyelle was barely making it 3 blocks without having to stop and breathe through waves of agony that made her want to vomit. Think! The power in her chest pulsed weakly, trying to respond to her desperation. It wanted to help, wanted to burn through the poison, cauterize the wound, keep her moving. But using it now would be like lighting a signal flare visible from across the kingdom. Every mage in Bloodspire would feel the surge of Umbra energy and converge on her position like wolves on wounded prey. Footsteps at the mouth of the alley, heavy boots, multiple sets. Nyelle's hand moved instinctively, calling shadows. They pooled around her feet sluggishly, wrapping up her legs like cold water, making her blend into the darkness between buildings. Not invisible, but close enough. 3 guards ran past, their armor clanking, weapons drawn. One of them slowed, his head turning toward the alley, like he sensed something. Nyelle held her breath, didn't move, didn't blink. The guard stared into the darkness for 5 long seconds. Then his companion shouted something from down the street, and he turned away, following at a run. Nyelle waited until their footsteps faded completely before letting herself slide down the wall, her legs finally giving out. She sat in the filth of the alley, rotting vegetables, human waste, things she didn't want to identify, and tried to think through the fog of pain. She couldn't keep running like this, couldn't fight an entire army while bleeding out. But she also couldn't stay here, couldn't let them corner her in some forgotten alley where no one would witness what they did to her body. North, always north. Nyelle pushed herself upright, using the wall for support. Her legs shook, her vision tunneled. Blood was soaking through her shirt now, warm and sticky against her skin. She stumbled forward, 1 step, then another, then another. The world became a blur of pain and determination, narrowing until all that existed was the next footfall, the next corner, the next breath dragged into lungs that didn't want to work anymore. She passed through the merchant district like a ghost, avoiding the main streets where patrols would be heaviest, cut through the slums where people knew better than to ask questions or offer help, skirted the edge of the industrial quarter where the forges burned day and night, their heat making her already feverish skin feel like it was melting. North. Always north. Her internal compass was the only thing still working properly. Time lost meaning. Minutes felt like hours. Hours compressed into heartbeats. The sky above shifted from deep purple to true black, stars appearing one by one like witnesses to her slow destruction. She fell twice, got up both times. The third time she wasn't sure she could. Nyelle lay on the cold ground, cobblestones this time, cleaner than the alley, but just as unforgiving, and stared up at the stars. They were beautiful, distant and cold and completely indifferent to whether she lived or died. Kind of comforting, actually. At least the universe didn't pretend to care. Get up. The voice wasn't external. It came from inside her head, the presence that had been with her since the Ashlands, the Umbra consciousness that was part of her now. Can't, Nyelle whispered. You can. You will. Why? So I can die standing instead of lying down? So you can live long enough to finish what you started. Get up. Nyelle closed her eyes. I'm tired. Then die tired, but die on your feet facing your enemies, not on your back in the street like discarded trash. The words hit harder than any physical blow, because they were right. She'd come too far, survived too much, transformed too completely to give up now. If she died tonight, fine. Death didn't scare her anymore, but she'd die moving forward, not collapsed in defeat. Nyelle forced herself up. It took 3 tries. On the 3rd, she made it to her knees. On the 4th, she was standing, shaking, bleeding, barely conscious. but standing. She started walking again. The old temple ruins materialized out of the darkness like a fever dream. Crumbling stone walls, collapsed roof open to the night sky, vegetation growing through cracks in the foundation, reclaiming what humans had abandoned. Nyelle stumbled through the entrance, her legs finally giving out completely. She hit the ground hard, the impact sending fresh agony through her wounded ribs. This time she did scream, couldn't help it, the sound tearing out of her throat raw and broken. She lay there, gasping, blood pooling beneath her. This was it. This was as far as she could go. Maybe the resistance would find her body in the morning. Maybe they'd use her death as a rallying cry, proof of the king's brutality. Maybe... Holy shit! The voice came from above. Nyelle tried to turn her head, but her body wasn't responding anymore. Footsteps approached, multiple people, moving fast. Is that... Get Corin, now! Move! Hands grabbed her, lifting. Nyelle tried to fight, tried to summon her power, but nothing happened. The poison had spread too far, suppressing everything that made her dangerous, turning her back into what she'd been, weak, helpless. Nothing. Easy, a familiar voice said. Mara. We're not going to hurt you. You're with friends. No such thing, Nyelle managed, her voice barely a whisper. As friends. Yeah, well, we're the closest you're getting. Now shut up and let us save your stubborn life. They carried her deeper into the ruins, through passages that shouldn't exist in a building this destroyed. Hidden corridors. Secret chambers. The temple was much larger than it appeared. Tunnels extending underground, rooms carved from living rock. Finally, they laid her on something soft. Someone pressed a hand against her wounded ribs, and the pain that followed was beyond description. Nyelle screamed again, her back arching off whatever she was lying on, and then darkness swallowed everything. She woke to the sound of arguing. Can't trust her. She walked into the arena with no plan, no backup, nearly got herself killed. She also made Darius look weak for the first time in his reign. That counts for something. Counts for what? Getting us all executed when the royal guard traces her here? They won't. We covered her trail, cleaned the blood, used counterscents. You hope we covered everything, but if you missed even one drop of blood, one witness, one guard who saw her heading north, then we fight. Isn't that what we've been preparing for? Preparing to fight is different from actually fighting. Most of us have never killed anyone. Then maybe it's time we learned. Nyelle opened her eyes. She was in a small room carved directly from stone, lit by oil lamps that cast dancing shadows on rough-hewn walls. A dozen people stood around the bed she was lying on, all of them staring at her with expressions ranging from awe to suspicion to barely concealed hostility. Mara stood at the front, arms crossed over her chest. You're awake, she said flatly. Good. We need to talk. Nyelle sat up slowly, testing her body. The wound on her ribs was still there. She could feel the bandages wrapped tight around her torso. But the screaming agony had dulled to a manageable throb. The poison was gone. She could feel her power flowing normally again, no longer suppressed by whatever toxin the Umbra killer blade had carried. What did you do? She asked. Corin extracted the poison, took him 4 hours and nearly killed you twice in the process. Mara gestured to an older man standing near the back, gray-haired with a healer's steady hands and eyes that had seen too much death. You're welcome, by the way. Thank you, Nyelle said, meeting the healer's gaze. The man nodded once but didn't smile. No one here was smiling. Now, Mara continued, her voice sharp. Want to tell us what the hell happened in that arena? Because the entire city is losing its mind. Half the population thinks you're a demon sent to destroy them. The other half thinks you're some kind of savior, and Darius has declared martial law. Guards are searching every building, arresting anyone even suspected of helping you. Nyelle swung her legs off the bed, ignoring the protests of pain from her healing ribs. He tried to execute me. Used Umbra killer weapons and suppression chains designed specifically to contain people like me. I broke free. Yeah, we heard that part. A young man stepped forward, beta, maybe 20, with sharp eyes and an expression harder than his age suggested. What we didn't hear was how. Because according to the rumors spreading through the streets, you vaporized unbreakable chains, threw the Alpha King across the arena like he weighed nothing, and walked through 50 armed guards without killing a single one of them. Your point? My point is, what the hell are you? Really? Nyelle looked around the room at the faces watching her, fear and hope mixing in equal measure. These people had risked everything to save her, risked their lives, their families, their futures. They deserved the truth. I'm Umbra, she said quietly. Last descendant of the sovereign line. The bloodline the first Alphas tried to genocide during the purges 300 years ago. The silence that followed was absolute. Then the room exploded. I knew it. The Umbra were monsters who burned cities. They nearly destroyed the entire world. We saved a fucking mass murderer. This is insane. Enough! Mara's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Everyone shut the hell up and let her explain before you start throwing accusations. The voices died, but the tension remained. Nyelle stood, facing them. Everything you've been taught about the Umbra is a lie. We weren't monsters, we were just different. Powerful in ways the Alphas couldn't control or understand. So they killed us. Systematically hunted down every man, woman, and child who carried our bloodline. Burned our cities, erased our history. Made sure no one would remember us as anything but villains who deserved extinction. And you want us to believe you're the victims here? The sharp-eyed young man's voice dripped skepticism. That 300 years of recorded history somehow got it wrong? I want you to believe that winners write history, and the Alphas won. Nyelle met his gaze steadily. But yeah, if you want to walk away right now, I understand. I'm dangerous. I'm unstable. Associating with me could get you all killed. So make your choice. She started toward the door. Wait. Mara grabbed her arm. Where do you think you're going? Away. I won't risk your lives. Too late for that. We were already risked the moment we decided to oppose Darius. Mara turned to face the group. Look, I know this is terrifying. Trust me. I'm scared shitless right now. But she's right about one thing. We've been fighting a losing battle for years. Sabotage, small protests, trying to change the system from within. And what has it gotten us? More dead. More imprisoned. More forgotten. She turned back to Nyelle, her grip tightening. But you? You walked into that arena and made the king look weak. Made the entire system look vulnerable. For the first time in my life, I'm hearing people question whether the Alphas actually deserve to rule. Whether the hierarchy is justified. That's worth something. It's worth getting killed, someone muttered from the back. We're already getting killed. Mara's voice rose, sharp and angry. Just slower, quietly. One by one, in ways nobody notices or cares about. At least this way we go down fighting for something that matters. Silence stretched like a wire pulled too tight. Then Corin, the healer who'd saved her life, spoke up, his voice rough as gravel. I'll support her. Not because I trust her completely, but because I've spent 40 years watching children die under Alpha rule, and I'm tired of it. One by one, others nodded. Not everyone. 4 people left immediately, their expressions making it clear they wanted nothing to do with this insanity. But more stayed than left. The sharp-eyed young man was last. He studied Nyelle for a long moment, then sighed heavily. Fine, I'm in. But if you betray us, if this turns out to be some elaborate trap or you go psycho and start burning cities, I'll kill you myself. Fair enough, Nyelle said. Name's Finn, the young man added. And you should know, most of us have never fought in our lives. We're servants, laborers, merchants, not warriors. Then I'll teach you. In how long? The Royal Guard could find us tomorrow. Then we make tomorrow count. Nyelle looked around the room. Darius isn't going to stop. He can't. I embarrassed him publicly, proved he's not invincible. If he lets me live, his entire authority collapses. So he'll keep hunting until one of us is dead. Which means we need to move first, Mara said. Move how? Finn asked. Mara's smile was sharp and humorless. We give them something bigger to worry about than one escaped Umbra. We start a revolution. They planned through the night. The resistance had more resources than Nyelle expected. Safe houses scattered throughout the city, informants embedded in the palace staff, even a handful of sympathetic guards willing to look the other way when needed. Nothing that could match the royal army in open combat, but enough to cause serious damage if deployed strategically.
The coronation ceremony, Mara said, spreading a hand-drawn map across the stone table.
3 days from now, Darius is using it to reassert his authority, remind everyone who's in charge after the arena incident made him look weak.
Coronation? Nyelle frowned.
He's already king.
Recoronation. Renewal of vows to the throne. Political theater meant to restore confidence. Mara tapped the map. But here's the important part. Every noble in the kingdom will be there. Every power player. Every major alpha family. All in one place. All watching. Finn leaned forward, his expression skeptical.
You want to crash a coronation? That's suicide.
Maybe, Mara said, but it's also the perfect opportunity. Maximum visibility, maximum impact. If we're going to make a statement, that's when we do it.
What kind of statement? Nyelle asked.
Mara's eyes were hard as stone. The kind that shows them their system is broken. That the hierarchy they've maintained through fear and violence for 3 centuries isn't invincible. That people are done accepting their place.
You're talking about a coup, Corin said flatly.
I'm talking about revolution.
Mara looked around the table. We've been nibbling at the edges for years, sabotaging supply lines, spreading dissent, trying to build support slowly, but slow gets us nowhere. Time to go for the throat. Nyelle felt something crystallize in her chest, not power, but purpose, a choice becoming certainty.
If we do this, she said slowly, carefully, people are going to die. A lot of people.
Guards who are just following orders. Servants caught in the crossfire. Maybe innocents who just wanted to watch a ceremony. People are already dying, Finn said, his voice harsh. Every day. In the slums. In the work camps. In the arenas where Omegas fight for entertainment. This system kills people constantly. We'd just be making it loud enough that everyone has to pay attention instead of pretending not to see. Nyelle looked down at the map. The Great Hall was marked clearly, the same hall where she'd been destroyed months ago, where her life had ended and something else had begun. Full circle.
What's the plan? She asked.
Mara smiled.
You walk in the front door. Make yourself impossible to ignore. While every eye is on you, we move through the servant passages, get our people in position, lock down exits, cut off reinforcements from the barracks.
And then?
Then you challenge him again, publicly. Force him to either accept and fight you fairly or refuse and show everyone he's afraid. Either way, the illusion of his absolute authority shatters.
And if he just orders his guards to kill me immediately? That's where we come in, Finn gestured to the other resistance members. We'll be scattered through the crowd, armed, ready. If they move on you, we move on them. Turn it into chaos.
Chaos gets people killed.
So does doing nothing, Mara said. Your choice, Nyelle. Play it safe and stay hidden while the system grinds us all into dust. Or take the risk and maybe, change something. Nyelle was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded. All right, let's burn it down, Tub. The next 3 days were brutal. Nyelle trained with the resistance fighters, trying to teach them enough to survive what was coming. Most had never held a weapon before, their combat experience limited to street brawls and desperate self-defense. Stop swinging like you're trying to club someone, she told a young woman who kept telegraphing her strikes. Fast and mean. Throat, eyes, groin. You're not trying to win honorably, you're trying to survive. They learned quickly, desperation making them absorb information that should have taken months. Finn was the best of them, his movements sharp and economical, like he'd been in real fights before. Where'd you learn that? Nyelle asked after he disarmed her in a practice bout. Streets. You grow up Omega in the slums, you learn to fight, or you don't grow up. His expression was hard. I've got scars from guards who thought it was funny to beat kids. I've watched friends die because they couldn't afford medicine. So yeah, I'm ready to burn this whole system to ash. Nyelle saw herself in him, the anger, the determination, the willingness to die if it meant taking the system down too. Don't get yourself killed, she said. Same to you. On the second day, Mara pulled Nyelle aside. I need to know something, she said. When we're in there, when things get violent, are you going to hesitate? What do you mean? I mean, when you're facing Darius, are you going to hold back because of the bond? Because of what you felt for him before? Nyelle's jaw tightened. There is no bond. He severed it, destroyed it. That's not what I asked. Silence stretched between them. Finally, Nyelle spoke, her voice low and hard. I'm going to give him the same mercy he gave me, which is to say, none. Mara studied her face, then nodded. Good, because we can't afford mercy right now. Mercy gets us killed. On the third day, Corin approached her with a warning. Your wound has healed, he said, but the scar tissue is weak, compromised by the Umbra killer poison. If you take another hit from one of those weapons, especially in the same area, it could kill you outright. Your body's resistance to that specific toxin has been damaged. How badly? Badly enough that a second dose might stop your heart before I could extract it. His expression was grave. Don't let them hit you again. I'll try. Don't try. Succeed. Corin gripped her shoulder. Because if you die, this whole thing collapses. You're the symbol now. The proof that they can be challenged. Without you, I know, Nyelle said. I won't let you down. But the weight of it pressed on her chest like a stone. An entire movement depending on her survival, on her strength, on her ability to be the symbol they needed. No pressure at all. The day of the coronation arrived. Nyelle stood in the safe house, staring at a reflection in a cracked mirror. The woman looking back barely resembled the servant girl who'd scrubbed floors and kept her eyes down. Her hair was shorter now, practical, not decorative. Her eyes held a hardness that came from staring down death and choosing to keep walking. Her stance was different, balanced, ready, dangerous. She'd become the thing Darius feared. The question was, would it be enough? Mara appeared in the doorway. It's time. Nyelle turned. Everyone ready? As ready as they'll ever be. Finn's team is covering the north exits. Corin's handling the servant passages. I'll be in the crowd with the others, ready to move when you give the signal. What's the signal? You'll know it when you do it. Probably something dramatic. Mara handed her a dark cloak. This'll get you past the initial checkpoints. After that, you're exposed. Nyelle took the cloak, feeling its weight. Not just fabric, responsibility. Lives, futures, everything they'd risked on a bet that she could actually pull this off. Mara, she said quietly, if this goes wrong, if I die, you won't. But if I do, don't stop. Keep fighting, because someone needs to, even if… Nyelle. Mara grabbed her shoulders, forcing eye contact. You're not going to die. You're going to walk in there, scare the shit out of every alpha in that hall, and show them that their time is ending. Got it? Nyelle managed a small smile. Got it. They walked through hidden passages beneath the temple, emerging into the streets as twilight painted the sky in shades of blood and gold. The city was alive with energy, people streaming toward the palace, dressed in their best clothes, excited for the spectacle. They had no idea they were about to witness history. One way or another. Nyelle pulled the hood up and joined the flow of people. The palace gates were heavily guarded, but the sheer volume of attendees made individual checks impossible. She slipped through with a group of merchants, keeping her head down, her power locked tight to avoid detection by any mages scanning for Umbra energy. Inside, she broke away from the crowd, moving through corridors she knew by heart from months spent invisible. The layout hadn't changed. More guards, more weapons, more tension, but the bones of the palace were the same. She made her way toward the Great Hall, her heart pounding hard enough that she could feel it in her throat. This was it. The point where everything either worked or fell apart spectacularly. The massive oak doors loomed ahead, reinforced with steel, guarded by 4 alphas in full armor. Through them, she could hear the ceremony beginning. Formal speeches. Ritual declarations, the sound of thousands responding in unison. Nyelle stopped 20 feet from the doors. Took a breath, felt the power coil in her chest, ready and eager. This was going to get bloody. People were going to die. Maybe her included. But the alternative was accepting the system that had destroyed her, going back to being nothing, letting them win. And she was done letting anyone decide her worth. Nyelle threw back her hood and started walking toward the doors. The guards saw her immediately. Halt! She didn't halt. I said stop. No, Nyelle said simply. The guards moved to block her path, weapons drawn. She raised her hand, and shadows erupted from the floor like living things wrapping around their legs, pulling them down. They hit the ground hard, armor clanking, shouting in alarm. Nyelle walked past them, put both hands against the massive doors. and pushed. They slammed open with a boom like thunder, the sound echoing through the great hall and cutting off the ceremony mid-speech. Every head turned. 1,000 people staring as Nyelle Vireth walked into the hall, power rippling around her like heat waves, her eyes blazing silver. Darius stood on the raised platform, frozen mid-gesture, his expression shifting from shock to rage to something that might have been fear. "Sorry I'm late," Nyelle called out, her voice carrying across the stunned silence. "Didn't get my invitation. Figured I'd crash anyway." She walked down the center aisle, shadows pooling at her feet with every step. Guards moved to intercept. Nyelle raised both hands, and walls of silver fire erupted on either side of the aisle, forcing them back. The crowd gasped. Some screamed. Most just stared, frozen between terror and fascination. Nyelle kept walking until she stood at the base of the platform, looking up at Darius. "We need to finish our conversation," she said. "The one about what happens when people stop being afraid of you." Darius's jaw was clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping. His hands were fists at his sides. "You dare interrupt! I dare!" Nyelle let more power show, flames dancing across her shoulders. "You taught me to, when you rejected me, when you tried to execute me, when you sent assassins with Umbra killer weapons. You taught me that the only power that matters is the power to say no." She spread her arms wide. "So here's me saying no. No to your hierarchy, no to your fear-based rule, no to the system you built on genocide." Her voice rose, filling the hall. "And if you want to stop me, then come down here and face me yourself. No traps, no assassins, no Umbra killer weapons, just you and me. Prove you're actually strong enough to rule, instead of just brutal enough to hold power through violence." The hall erupted. Half the nobles fled for the exits. Guards poured in from every entrance. And in the crowd, Nyelle saw the resistance members throwing off their disguises, drawing weapons, moving into position. Darius stared down at her, and for a moment, just a moment, she saw something besides rage in his eyes. Respect, fear, maybe even regret. Then his expression hardened into cold fury. "You want a war?" he snarled, and leaped from the platform, his alpha dominance crashing down like a physical force as he transformed midair into something massive and terrible, his wolf form bursting through clothes and skin, all muscle and fury, and teeth the size of daggers. Nyelle didn't flinch. She met him halfway. Their collision shook the foundation of the great hall. Stone cracked, windows shattered. The crowd that hadn't already fled screamed and scrambled for cover as power met power in an explosion of silver fire and alpha dominance that sent shockwaves radiating outward. Darius's wolf was enormous, easily twice the size of a normal alpha, black as midnight with those same cold gray eyes. He slammed into Nyelle with the force of a battering ram, jaws snapping toward her throat. She rolled with the impact, using his momentum against him, and came up wreathed in flames that made him howl and pull back. "That all you got?" she spat. He circled her, snarling, saliva dripping from fangs that could tear her apart. Around them, chaos reigned. Guards fought resistance members. Nobles cowered behind overturned tables. Mara's voice cut through the noise, coordinating attacks, keeping their people organized. But Nyelle's focus narrowed to the massive wolf in front of her. This wasn't just about revolution anymore. This was personal. Darius lunged again, faster this time. His claws raked across her shoulder, drawing blood, pain flaring hot and immediate. Nyelle twisted away, her hand coming up trailing shadows that wrapped around his foreleg like chains. He tore through them with brute strength. But it cost him a second she used to drive her fist, wrapped in silver fire, into his ribs. The impact sent him sliding across marble floors, his claws scrabbling for purchase. He hit a stone pillar hard enough to crack it, and for a moment, just a moment, she saw the wolf's form flicker, saw the man beneath. "You can't win this." Darius's voice came out distorted, half growl. "Even if you kill me, my generals will hunt you forever. The system won't fall just because one man dies. Then I'll kill them too." Nyelle stalked forward, power building in her hands. "One by one, until none of you are left. And become exactly what we feared, a monster who destroys everything. You made me this." The words tore out of her, raw and bleeding. "I was nothing. I wanted nothing except to survive.
And you couldn't even let me have that. She unleashed a torrent of silver fire.
Darius barely dodged, the flames scorching the floor where he'd been standing. He shifted back to human form in a fluid motion, standing there in torn clothes, blood running down his ribs from where she'd hit him. "I know," he said quietly. "I know what I did to you." Knowing doesn't fix it. No, it doesn't. He wiped blood from his mouth. But maybe this does. He raised his hands, not in attack, in surrender. The hall went silent. Even the fighting paused as everyone processed what they were seeing. The Alpha King, surrendering. "What are you doing?" Nyelle's voice was sharp with suspicion. "What I should have done months ago." Darius lowered himself to one knee, his head bowed. "I reject my rejection. I acknowledge the bond that fate chose. I acknowledge you, Nyelle Vireth, as my equal, my mate, my—" "Don't." The word came out cold. "Don't you dare." He looked up at her, and the expression on his face was something she'd never seen before. Broken. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said. "I know I don't deserve it, but I'm trying to give you what you needed then. Recognition, respect, a choice." "A choice?" Nyelle laughed, harsh and bitter. "Now you give me a choice? After you destroyed me in front of everyone? After you sent assassins to kill me? After everything, now you think you can just kneel and make it right?" "No, I don't think it makes anything right." Darius stayed on his knee, his voice steady despite the blood and exhaustion. "But I'm tired, Nyelle. Tired of maintaining power through fear. Tired of watching people suffer to preserve a system that's been broken for centuries. You were right. About all of it." He gestured around the hall, at the fighting, the chaos, the resistance members standing over fallen guards. "This is what I've built, a kingdom held together by violence, and I'm done defending it." Nyelle stared at him, her mind racing. This had to be a trick. Had to be some manipulation, some play for sympathy to throw her off balance. But his eyes looked genuinely empty, like something inside him had finally broken under the weight of 3 centuries of brutal tradition. "What are you saying?" she asked carefully. "I'm saying—" Darius took a shaky breath. "I'm saying I'll abdicate, step down, give you the throne, let you rebuild this kingdom however you want. Just—" his voice cracked. "Just don't become what you're fighting against. Don't let this turn you into someone who rules through destruction and fear." The hall was utterly silent now, every eye on them, waiting. Nyelle looked at the man kneeling before her, the Alpha King who'd destroyed her, who'd orchestrated her humiliation, who'd sent killers to end her life. Everything in her screamed to finish this, to kill him, to make him pay for every second of agony he'd caused. But she looked past him at the hall, at the resistance members, bleeding and battered but alive, at the nobles cowering behind pillars, fear written across their faces, at the system that had ground millions of people into dust for 300 years. And she realized something. Killing Darius wouldn't change the system. It would just continue the cycle. Violence answered with violence. Power maintained through fear. Another tyrant rising to replace the last one. The Umbra way, Essence had called it. Break bones to make them stronger. Burn flesh to teach control. But maybe there was another way. A harder way. Nyelle's power flickered and died, the silver flames extinguishing. "Get up," she said quietly. Darius looked up at her, confusion and hope warring on his face. "Get up." He stood slowly, wary, like he expected her to attack the moment he was vulnerable. Nyelle stepped closer, close enough that she could see the scar on his jaw, could smell blood and sweat and exhaustion on him, could feel the ghost of the bond they'd shared, destroyed but still somehow present in the space between them. "You don't get to abdicate," she said. "You don't get to just walk away from this and let me clean up your mess." His expression fell. "But," Nyelle continued, her voice hard, "you're going to help me fix it, not from a throne, from the ground up. You're going to work alongside the people you've spent your life ruling over. You're going to see what life is actually like for Omegas, for Betas, for everyone outside your protected circle, and you're going to help me build something better." "I don't understand." "I'm not taking your throne. I'm destroying it." Nyelle turned to address the entire hall, her voice rising. "No more Alpha Kings. No more hierarchy based on what you were born as. No more system that says some people matter more than others. She looked back at Darius. You wanted to give me a choice? Here's my choice. I choose to break the cycle. Not with more violence, not by becoming another tyrant, but by proving there's a different way. Mara pushed through the crowd, her face streaked with blood and soot. Nyelle, what are you doing? This is our chance to take everything. And then what? Rule the same way they did, just with different faces on the throne? Nyelle shook her head. That's not revolution, that's just revenge. Revenge is what we came for. No. Nyelle's voice was firm. We came to change things, and real change doesn't happen through violence alone. It happens when you force the people in power to actually see the damage they've caused. To face it, to fix it. She turned back to Darius. You said you acknowledge me as your equal. Prove it. Not by surrendering power to me, but by using whatever power you have left to dismantle this system piece by piece. Darius stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly, he nodded. What do you need from me? Everything. Nyelle's voice was cold. Every law that keeps Omegas as property, gone. Every regulation that privileges alphas, gone. Every tradition that maintains the hierarchy, burned to ash. And you're going to be the one to announce it. You're going to stand in front of this kingdom and tell them that everything they believed was a lie. They'll revolt. The alpha families will never accept. Then let them revolt. Let them show everyone who they really are. Nyelle smiled without warmth. And when they do, the rest of us will be ready. She looked around the hall at the resistance members, at the nobles slowly emerging from hiding, at the guards who'd stopped fighting and were just watching this play out. This is the new order, she announced, not built on dominance, not maintained through fear, built on the idea that strength isn't measured by who you can control, but by what you choose not to destroy. Finn pushed forward, his expression incredulous. You're just letting him go? After everything? I'm not letting him go. I'm putting him to work. Nyelle met Finn's eyes. Killing him would feel good for about 5 minutes. Making him spend the rest of his life fixing what he broke? That's actual justice. That's mercy he doesn't deserve. Maybe, but I'm not doing it for him. I'm doing it because I refuse to let what they did to me turn me into them. She turned back to Darius one last time. You wanted to know what I am. I'm the consequence of your choices, the living proof that trying to destroy something you fear only makes it stronger. And I'm the reminder that you're going to carry for the rest of your life, that you had a chance to choose different, and you didn't. Darius's jaw tightened, but he nodded. I'll help, however I can. Good. Nyelle's voice was flat. Because you owe a debt that's going to take lifetimes to repay. And I'm going to make sure you spend every second trying. The aftermath was chaos. Not the violent kind, but the administrative nightmare of actually changing an entire system of government. The alpha families resisted, some vocally, others through quiet sabotage. But with Darius himself supporting the reforms, their power base crumbled faster than anyone expected. It turned out that when the king himself admitted the system was broken, people started questioning whether they should fight to preserve it. Some did anyway. 3 alpha lords tried to organize a coup within the first month. Nyelle dealt with them personally, not with violence, but by exposing every corrupt practice, every abuse of power, every crime they'd committed while hiding behind their status. Public trials. Full accountability. 2 fled the kingdom. 1 took his own life rather than face justice. The message was clear. The old ways were dead. Nyelle didn't take a throne. She didn't take a title. She became something else, a force that moved through the kingdom like wind through grass. Impossible to pin down, but impossible to ignore. She worked with the resistance to establish councils instead of monarchies, representation instead of rule by birthright, systems of accountability that actually meant something. It was messy, it was complicated, it was exhausting, but it was real change. Darius kept his word. He worked alongside former servants, former prisoners, former nothing people who'd spent their lives invisible. Nyelle made sure he saw everything, the poverty, the abuse, the quiet desperation that the palace walls had hidden from him. She made him look, made him understand, made him carry the weight of what his reign had perpetuated. They barely spoke to each other. The bond between them, destroyed and somehow still present, hung in the air like a ghost whenever they were in the same room. Neither acknowledged it. Neither tried to rebuild what had been shattered. Some things, once broken, couldn't be fixed, only transformed into something else entirely. 6 months after the coronation that became a revolution, Nyelle stood on a balcony overlooking Bloodspire. The city looked different now, cleaner, safer. The slums were being rebuilt, the work camps had been shut down. Omegas walked the streets with their heads up instead of their eyes down. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was. But it was better. Footsteps behind her. She didn't turn. "The Alpha Council wants to meet with you," Darius said quietly. "They're still resisting the property reforms." "Let them resist. The reforms are happening anyway. They're threatening to withhold resources from the outer provinces. Then we'll redistribute resources from their estates. They have more than they need." Silence. Then Darius moved to stand beside her at the railing, maintaining careful distance. "You've changed the world in 6 months," he said, "accomplished more than I did in 20 years of rule. Because you were maintaining, I'm building. Still." His voice was rough. "I wanted you to know, I see it, what you're doing, what you've become, and I—" He paused. "I'm sorry for what I did to you, for what I took from you." Nyelle finally looked at him. He looked older, tired, the weight of actual accountability aging him in ways ruling had never done. "I know you are," she said quietly, "but sorry doesn't undo it." "No, it doesn't." Darius stared out at the city. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I'd accepted the bond that night? If I'd chosen different? Every day." And Nyelle considered the question seriously. "We probably would have been miserable. You would have resented me for threatening your power. I would have resented you for representing everything I'd been taught to fear. The bond would have been a chain instead of a connection. So maybe it's better this way. Maybe." Nyelle turned to face him fully. "Or maybe if you'd been brave enough to choose love over fear, we could have built this together, as actual partners, instead of—" She gestured at the space between them. "Whatever this is?" "Penance," Darius said. "On my part, anyway." "And on mine?" "Mercy, which is more than I deserve." Nyelle looked at him, really looked at him, saw the man beneath the title, beneath the conditioning, beneath the 3 centuries of brutal tradition that had shaped him into a weapon, and saw someone capable of change, actually changing, not just saying the words but doing the work. "The bond is gone," she said. "You severed it, destroyed it beyond repair." "I know, but—" Nyelle held his gaze. "Maybe we can build something else. Not mates, not lovers, but allies. People who share a goal and work toward it together. I'd like that. Don't make me regret it." "I won't." Darius's voice was firm. "You have my word, for whatever that's worth now." "It's worth something. Not much, but something." Nyelle turned back to the city. "Now go deal with the Alpha Council. Tell them if they withhold resources, I'll personally redistribute their wealth to the people they're trying to punish." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "You're terrifying when you want to be." "Good. They should be terrified. Fear isn't always bad. It's just a matter of who's wielding it and why." Darius left. Nyelle stayed on the balcony, watching the sun set over Bloodspire. Behind her, she heard more footsteps. Mara this time. "The southern provinces are asking for aid," she said. "Crop failure. They need supplies. Send them. Whatever they need. Some of the council members are saying we can't afford—" "Then the council members can donate from their personal wealth. We're not letting people starve to maintain someone's profit margin." Mara smiled. "You know they hate you, right? The nobles, the old families, they call you a tyrant in private." "I know. Does it bother you?" Nyelle considered the question. "No, because I'm not ruling them. I'm just making sure they can't rule everyone else anymore. If that makes me a tyrant in their eyes, I can live with it." "What about the people who love you? The ones who see you as a savior?" "They need to stop." Nyelle's voice was sharp. "I'm not a savior. I'm just someone who survived long enough to fight back. Anyone could do what I'm doing if they had the power and the will. That's not true, and you know it." "Maybe." Nyelle turned to face her friend.
But I need them to believe it anyway. Because if this revolution is just about me, about one powerful person replacing another, then it's not a revolution at all. It's just a changing of the guard.
Mara studied her for a long moment.
You really believe all this, don't you? That you can actually change human nature? No. I believe I can change systems, and systems shape behavior. Nyelle looked back at the city. People aren't born cruel. They're taught to be. By systems that reward cruelty and punish compassion. Change the system, change what gets rewarded, and you change everything. And if you're wrong, then I fail, and someone else tries after me, and eventually maybe someone gets it right. Nyelle smiled slightly. That's how evolution works, through failure and adaptation. That's a lonely way to see the world. Maybe, but it's honest. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching darkness claim the city as lights began to appear in windows. Thousands of individual lives continuing, adapting, surviving. I heard Finn propose to Senna, Mara said eventually. Yeah? Yeah, apparently, risking death together is great for romance. Nyelle laughed, actually laughed. Good for them. They deserve happiness. What about you? What about me? Do you deserve happiness? Nyelle was quiet for a long time. I don't know, she finally said. But I'm learning that maybe it's not about deserving. It's about choosing every day to keep going, to keep building, to keep trying to be better than the worst thing that ever happened to you. That's very wise. That's very exhausting. Mara laughed, the sound warm and genuine. Come on, council meeting in an hour. They want to discuss the education reforms. Let me guess, the Alpha families think teaching history honestly is too divisive. Among other complaints. Of course they do. Nyelle pushed off the railing. Let's go remind them that their opinions on education reform matter exactly as much as everyone else's, which is to say, one voice among many. They walked together through the palace corridors. Servants nodded respectfully as they passed, but didn't bow, didn't scrape, didn't make themselves invisible. The small changes, the ones that mattered most. 3 years after the revolution, Nyelle stood in the ruins of Mordaeth again. The library was gone, collapsed finally under the weight of centuries and the fading of ancient magic. But she didn't need it anymore. Essence's teachings were part of her now, woven into muscle memory and instinct. She'd come back for closure, to say goodbye to the place where she'd been reborn. The scorched circle where her power had first erupted was still visible, the earth permanently marked by that transformation. Nyelle stood in the center of it, feeling the ghost of that moment, the pain, the awakening. The choice to keep living when dying would have been easier. I wondered if I'd find you here. She turned. Darius stood at the edge of the circle, looking different than he had 3 years ago. Older, yes, but also lighter, like the weight he'd carried for so long had finally started to ease. How did you know where I was? She asked. I didn't, He gestured vaguely. I felt like you might be here. Don't know why. The bond's gone. I know, but sometimes I still... He cut himself off. Never mind, it doesn't matter. Nyelle studied him. What do you want, Darius?
To tell you something, while we're here, where it started. He stepped closer, his boots crunching on scorched earth. I've been working with the Truth and Reconciliation Councils, listening to testimonies from people who suffered under my rule, under my father's rule, under the whole system. I know. I read the reports.
Then you know, his voice caught. You know how bad it was, how much pain, how much... He stopped, his jaw working. I can't fix it, can't undo it, but I'm trying to at least acknowledge it, all of it. That's good. It's not enough. No, but it's something. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Darius spoke again, his voice low and raw. I loved you, that night. When the bond snapped into place, I felt it, felt everything you were, everything you could have been to me. And I was terrified. Nyelle went very still. Not of you specifically, he continued, of what loving you would mean, what it would cost me, the power I'd have to give up, the certainty, the control. So I chose fear,
chose the throne, chose to destroy you rather than risk losing myself. Why are you telling me this now? Because you deserve to know it wasn't about you being Omega. Wasn't about you being weak or unworthy. It was about me being a coward. Darius met her eyes. You were never the problem, Nyelle. I was. The admission hung in the air between them. Nyelle felt something shift in her chest, not the bond, which was truly gone, but something else. A loosening. A release. She'd carried the weight of that rejection for so long, let it define her, let it fuel her rage and her transformation. And hearing him finally, truly acknowledge that it was never about her worthlessness. It felt like setting down a stone she'd been carrying for miles. Thank you, she said quietly. For saying that? I should have said it years ago. You weren't ready years ago. Neither was I. Nyelle looked around at the ruins. We both had to break before we could build something better. Do you think... Darius hesitated. Do you think there's a version of the world where we could have worked? Where I made the right choice that night? Yes. Do you wish we lived in that world? Nyelle considered the question seriously. Sometimes. When I'm tired. When the work feels impossible. When I wonder if all this change is actually making a difference, or if we're just rearranging deck chairs on a sinking ship. But then I remember who I was in that world. The version of me who never had to fight, never had to discover what I was capable of, never had to learn that survival is a choice you make every single day. She looked at him. I like who I became, even if the path to get here was agony. You're remarkable, Darius said softly. I don't know if I've ever told you that. You haven't. Then let me say it now. You're remarkable, strong in ways I never understood, kind in ways I never learned to be, and you're building something that's going to outlast both of us. Nyelle felt unexpected tears prick her eyes. Don't make me forgive you. I'm not ready for that. I'm not asking you to. He took a breath. I'm just trying to acknowledge the truth before it's too late. Too late for what? I'm stepping down completely, leaving Bloodspire, going to the outer provinces to work in the reconstruction efforts. Nyelle blinked. What? I've done what I can in the capital, but I'm still associated with the old regime. My presence makes real change harder. People can't move forward while I'm standing there reminding them of the past. Darius's expression was calm, resolved. So I'm leaving, going where I can do actual work instead of being a symbol. You'll be killed. The outer provinces still have alpha loyalists who, then I'll be killed. That's a risk I'm willing to take. Why? Because you taught me something. Darius smiled slightly. You taught me that real strength isn't holding on to power. It's knowing when to let go. Nyelle stared at him. This man who'd destroyed her, who'd spent 3 years trying to repair the damage, who was now willing to risk everything to finish the work. I don't know what to say, she admitted. You don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know, before I left, that meeting you, even in the worst possible way, changed my life, made me see things I'd been blind to, made me better than I was. He turned to leave. Darius? He stopped. Don't get yourself killed out there. The kingdom needs people who are willing to do the hard work of change, even the ones who screwed up before. I'll try. And Nyelle took a breath. Thank you for finally being brave enough to choose different. Darius looked back at her one last time, and in his eyes she saw everything they'd been, everything they could have been, and everything they'd chosen to become instead. Goodbye, Nyelle. Goodbye. He walked away, disappearing into the ruins. Nyelle stood alone in the scorched circle, feeling the weight of closure settling over her shoulders. The girl who'd died here was truly gone now. The king who'd killed her was choosing to become something else. And she was free. Free to build. Free to change things. Free to be exactly who she chose to be, without the chains of what had been done to her or what she'd done in response. Nyelle looked up at the sky, vast and open and full of possibility, and smiled. Not because everything was perfect, but because for the first time in her life, she wasn't defined by what others thought she was. She was simply herself. Nyelle Vireth, survivor, revolutionary, Umbra sovereign, human being who'd learned that the hardest battles weren't fought with power. but with the choice to keep being kind in a world that rewarded cruelty, to keep building in a world that made destroying easier, to keep hoping in a world that punished optimism. She took one last look at the ruins, at the place where she'd been unmade and remade, and walked away. Not toward the palace, not toward power or throne or title, just toward the next day, and the work that came with it, one step at a time, one choice at a time, one breath at a time. Building a world where no one would ever have to be destroyed just for existing. That was the real revolution, and it was just beginning. The end. Years later, historians would argue about what really happened that night in the Great Hall. Some claimed Nyelle Vireth was a warrior who conquered through force. Others said she was a politician who manipulated her way to power. A few insisted she was a monster who'd terrorized the kingdom into submission. They were all wrong. She was just a woman who'd been told she was nothing and decided that wasn't true. The rest was just consequences. But in the cities and towns and villages she'd helped reshape, people told a different story. They spoke of the Omega Queen who never took a crown, the Umbra Sovereign who chose mercy over vengeance, the woman who proved that being broken didn't mean staying broken. And in the quiet moments, when children asked their parents what real strength looked like, the answer was always the same. It looked like Nyelle Vireth, walking away from a throne she could have taken, choosing to build instead of rule, to heal instead of hurt, to transform instead of destroy. That was the legacy she left. Not power, but possibility. And that changed everything.